Today we are going to test this bullshit. Test it.
Test it well. Test it firmly. Test it.
You're not going to talk that loud. That's some bullshit. I can talk this loud, but you... My mom says I'm a good boy.
Well, I don't say that, but I do
out loud. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, see, and already the fucking levels. We don't swear on this, do we?
We do sometimes. Yeah. We don't avoid swearing.
It's been like 9 months since we've done anything, so maybe it's time to swear. Would it draw in a target audience? Look, you're not even registering anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
What does it do if we are more quiet like this?
Well, I mean, I'm probably going to speak about this loud. I can go a little bit louder. Yeah. So we have the Assumption of Mary, we have Moonstone, we have Myrtle, we have the World.
Didn't even tell people what the hell they're listening to. Just diving right in.
Yeah,
This is what we're talking about.
They click the link.
Okay. Welcome to Radio Free Golgotha. We've forgotten how to do this, apparently.
Hello, everyone.
That's Al. I'm Jesse. Mime Jesse?
Mm-hmm.
Mime Jesse.
Yeah.
He doesn't speak much
Trapped.
or get out much. Trapped in an existential crisis. Lovely to be back, assuming we publish this episode.
Well, it is an episode of assumptions, so why the heck not?
I'd like to assume that we'll be okay. So this is technically for August 15th, 2019. Might as well start time-stamping these things.
Yeah.
We don't have a nice breathy Radio Free Golgotha at the start of our tracks, so...
Not yet.
Not yet. It's usually us insulting one another or testing our levels.
This is a good euphemism.
Yes. To be real insults, they must be silent, of course. But yes, okay, now tell people what they can expect in today's lineup.
Sure. Hi. Hello. Today, we're going to be celebrating the Assumption of Mary. Plant. Our plant sponsor, if we like, is Myrtle. Our stone is Moonstone, I believe.
It's the wrong character, but you did it beautifully. Myrtle. All right.
Rowan. Not Rowan today. Major Arcanum is going to be the world, or I guess the universe, depending on which deck you're using. Maybe discuss differences there.
Whether you're new Eon or old Eon.
That's so old Eon right now. And two other things. The demon we will be talking about is Hicpath or Hicpath or any number of other...
I like the kappa.
Yeah, you like
it's
that
very
one?
African, yeah.
Mm.
Hicpath. Hicpath.
Yeah. High-pact. Those seem to be the common ones. And their counterparted, I believe is the euphemism we usually use, or the terminology. Eshu of Kimbanda, Eshu das Matas.
Mm-hmm.
And the style of magic that we'll hopefully get to is possession, and all the things that may or may not entail. The figure of the week is Fortuna Major, and its corresponding Odu of Owani.
Owani. Or Owonrin.
Oh yes, one of the ones with Rin. And if
I can convince Al to talk about it, because he's got some feelings about this subject. Because Al is usually down to talk about most things, but sometimes he snorts before he says, okay, fine. Is snorting like when the bull makes the steam come out?
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of that with this subject, I think, for you, but...
Sure, yeah, but happy to talk about Aradia.
There we go. She who will not be named until such time as the... Yes. But, so there is a little bit of planning in this that, although selfishly Moonstone was because I just got a big shipment of Moonstone in.
Oh, nice.
To make things, but then realized that we are dealing with a Dianic feast day that is on the calendars, has an ancient feast associated with the goddess Diana, and therefore hunting moons woodsy, and as far as a magician, Aradia as a pseudo-historical figure, certainly much like Jesus, has more effect on the record than an appearance in history. So I was taught in biblical literature in high school, but not about Aradia, about Jesus.
I was going to say, that's...
No historical proof of Jesus' existence except for his impact upon society. So Josephus saying that we don't know who Jesus is, but we know his followers.
Know him by his works.
Yeah, we know him by the people that tell us he existed, or is a thing, because there's still a division between... we still ramble, believe me. It's still part of our gimmick. But the division between those who emphasize historical Christ, which therefore has an authority-based thing like the Catholic Church, which establishes the papacy through St. Peter, or the Christ spirit, which is pseudo-Gnostic, and you get even though he's a dick, St. Paul, who never met the historical Christ, never emphasized the historical Christ, and didn't talk about the authority that the historical Christ gave him, because he saw a blinding Jesus light, which is a different thing. The authority comes from Christ's spirit itself. Himself, herself, themselves.
Right, and this is one of the ways that we could talk about that bifurcation or that dichotomy, right? Between the letter and the spirit, or between a physical transmission of some kind and a moving in the spirit of the thing.
Well, certainly, I think it applies to the Assumption pretty most easily, that transition.
Right, and we have the meeting of those two things again, right? So we have our notion of attempting to more accurately synthesize down a historical perspective and narrative and context, and then we have the mythic meaning of it all, and then we have it kind of circling back round again, because with the restating of the doctrine, right? We're up to the 5 gems at this point. Maybe a bit earlier, or maybe that can come a little bit later if we're going to talk about what are we assuming? What is the...
Well, okay, so the Assumption of Mary is a major Marian feast day where Mary is assumed bodily into heaven, is the doctrine, which has only been dogma since the 50s, but is a tradition that does go back to the 3rd and 4th century, and there is textual support for it. One of the Psalms parallels the Ark of the Covenant, and returning this back to the kingdom of God, and Mary as the new Ark of the Covenant who bore the new covenant, which, more biblical literature, thank you, I wish I remembered your name, 9th grade biblical literature teacher, St. Francis High School, starts with an F, but drawing comparisons to the word overshadowed, the Holy Spirit overshadows Mary, which is the word that's used for when God, the Shekinah, comes to the Ark of the Covenant. That it is a word that is reserved in the Greek versions to reference God descending over the Ark of the Covenant, and parallel-wise, when the Holy Spirit descends to Mary or impregnates her, she is overshadowed by the Holy Spirit. Which is an interesting thing. We're talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament, quote-unquote, talking about using textual support of the Psalms to show that Mary was assumed bodily into heaven, that the Ark of the Covenant itself is taken into the kingdom of God. But what this is interesting is that it's one of those, like, at least it's not a time-traveling Jesus thing, because the Immaculate Conception to me is time-traveling Jesus, and that's its own fun thing. But this one, at least, that the proof of Jesus's victory over death is first bestowed, as we know it, upon his mother at her death. So he does say to the thieves, "You will be with me this day in paradise," but he also extends this, or that Mary's bodily assumption to heaven is proof of Jesus' success. So as the Mother of God, she's granted unique instant resurrection, which church doctrine about resurrection is so fascinating to go into, because you're going to start applying, scientific logic to it, whatever your millennial version of, not millennial, but, whatever your millennia's version of that is, what your current time stamp is.
Well, there is a bunch of millenarianism to it, right?
I just meant entitleism of the post.
These damn kids.
Yeah, these damn kids. Not that.
And the heroin.
Yeah, and their Tide soap pods or whatever. Speaking as one who I think, aren't we technically both millennials? It's a weird. You are more than me. Anyway, okay, so
that victory over sin and death, right? Primarily the victory over death, as you say, is Christ's. The evidence is that it happens to her kind of first, or contemporaneously, if we're talking about weird timey-wimey stuff. But more to the point, that it's the new Adam at that point, right? So we are explicitly talking about a return to prelapsarian conditions.
Yeah, that Mary is absolutely the daughter of Eve. She is the new Eve.
Right.
Which is weird because then Jesus is the new Adam, and it's very weird when it gets very womb possibility in our earlier conversation, of Kaker being the womb that is contained on the points on the end that contains the vastness. That there's also this concept of wakefulness and sleepfulness, wakefulness and or consciousness and lack of consciousness that I think is most exemplified in Gospel of Thomas when talking about those types of things. Then, because this is purposely esoteric, but that the dormition of Mary is part of Christianity across the board. That at some point Mary falls asleep. In Catholic dogma now, she is at that point assumed into heaven. It is not known as to whether she dies and then is assumed, and so if she's zombie like Jesus,
Right.
or there is, I think it's one of the quotes from maybe Pius, the something, Roman numeral insertion here, that does leave room for her being not died, alive and assumed.
Oh, which again is another one of those 1950s things, right?
Yeah.
It'd be Pius 12 at that point, wouldn't it?
Sure. Notes or something.
So there's some links to the Book of Revelation as well, right?
Yes. Well, the woman clothed with the sun allows for a Marian vision, and also for the Virgin Guadalupe, which is its own thing, and therefore Babylonian, not Babylonian, connections. Orthodox tradition does say that she is resurrected, but that she dies.
Right.
And is this question of resurrected in spirit versus body is the division in the dogma between many different parts of the church throughout history, both Protestant, Catholic, and as well as Orthodox. I think the thing that's quite fascinating about it is that this is one of the 8 days of obligation in a Catholic's calendar. Okay. So you have to go to church every Sunday to be a Catholic, and you have to observe the 8 holy days of obligation, as well as understand other sacraments and things like that. But this is one of the 8 days you must go to church. So there's something about that that's quite interesting, that like this forced Marian devotion, like understanding Mary is so important to being a Catholic that there are forced days where you must go. And she's involved in all of them, of course, as the Mother of God, where it's talking about like the birth of Jesus or the death of Jesus, she's there. But Immaculate Conception and Assumption of Mary, both of which have to do with Mary specifically. One's purifying the vessel, one is allowing the vessel to enter home, enter heaven. I find interesting that it is so prominent a feast day. And it's history-wise that there are, of course, parallels to the August 13th Dianic feast day, Roman holiday. So this is a day that is quite interesting as far as its syncretic parallels around the world, all throughout the former Roman Empire, for sure. But also its kind of repatriation, its own assumption back into popular neo-pagan lore as like this thing of looking to the quote old religion of Catholicism and seeing where they got stuff from the pagans and pulled it in and making it a prominent almost like a second Lady Day of the year.
Sure.
That especially if we consider that Lammas is, or Lunasa is 2 weeks long in its older incarnations, we're at the end of this by the time we get to the Assumption of Mary. Yeah. I feel like I interrupted you, though.
No, not at all. Not in the slightest. So as a day of obligation, those days generally, having been around for a lot longer, usually have a lot more, for want of a better term, folkloric practices around them? Or would you say those are more periods where people put that aside and, dressed in their best and looked good for?
I feel like the holy days of obligation, I have to look into the specific history, but when you're young, when I was young, I just assumed they were sacrosanct since ancient times. Like, I didn't understand that dogma is continually created, even though you understand that the Pope is the officiator of dogma, but like sure, when he changes dogma and takes purgatory away, like fine, Benedict, I don't acknowledge you as a pope anymore. And you know what? You left office anyway because of a money scandal or something else worse. But like, what did he effectively do? He made a bunch of saints that had never been made before from third world, new world countries, and he got rid of purgatory, which is like it's either you're either all in now or not. There's no like just the tip.
Right.
And that's, I don't know, dogma's a weird relationship. With the Holy Days of Obligation, I don't know what it was that like that there was already this devotion to this in certain countries. Yeah. Certainly Italy, with my Italian, I'm going to try and pronounce it like Portuguese or Spanish, and I'm going to get yelled at. Ferragosto, that is my my San Fernando Valley pronunciation of that. That might be from, you know, the days of Emperor Augustus.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know.
Augusti.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Anglicans do more under the Dormition mode. What do they call it? Like,
yeah.
Because I have friends that call it Sleepy Mary Day, which is totally like, which in Spanish I guess we could say mimis. Like this is you ask children if they're ready to go mimis. Dormir is to sleep. So, Merry Mimi Day.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many options with how to do these types of things. But I don't know. It's extremely popular in Europe as a feast day. Former Catholic countries for sure.
Mm-hmm. And a day associated with her even beyond the technicalities of various different denominations' doctrines about what exactly happened.
She's substituting for there's something
Mary
female Day that must be done in the heat of August.
Right.
No matter where you are, there must be something Marian that we are celebrating, which is interesting. Okay, and like okay. The Dianic connection is its own thing.
Do you think we can make something of it happening a day or two afterwards and being a solar emphasis rather than a lunar emphasis?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Mary is the moon, though, so it's interesting because you're forcing another eclipse. Like parallel-wise. So the eclipse is Jesus' death, where Mary is witness to her son's death,
mm-hmm.
and then Mary's death is witness to Jesus' life in the Assumption. So the moon joins the sun, whereas instead of the sun joining the moon.
Ah.
So the evidence is reversed, which is interesting because it's not usually talked about in eclipse terms, but then like, you know, our obsession with eclipses and a certain devil spirit. But I don't know, that's something interesting there.
Sure.
It is Psalm 132 that is the mentioning of the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah. I think with the Dianic connection too, so this kind of balance of solar and lunar, obviously the heat of August and what that is I don't know, quite telling. That it also the kind of what is it called? The Greek way or the Roman way, depending on who's talking about it, but the idea that you look at a catalog of a pantheon of gods from somewhere else and you just align them to your own.
Oh, yeah.
You know, early table of correspondences stuff,
mm-hmm.
And reductionist universalism from your own wonderful centrist point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we talk about, that is the sound of a rat drinking, he's an older rat. He knows when we do podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So he's, we'll just wait for that to stop. Thank you, Thomas. It's really lovely of you. Thank you.
The thirst is real.
Yeah. All right. I don't even know where we were. Dianic connections. Right. So Dianic connections also is interesting in the sense that the modern belief is that this took place in Ephesus, which is a more recent tradition. Most of the early descriptions say she died in Jerusalem. I also like that there is the girdle. Have you read about that? That there was... she came out of clouds and handed an apostle her girdle to show her that she was taken into heaven bodily. To prove.
Right.
So it's like she is literally floating around in the clouds in heaven, which is in this lovely, I don't know why it's this Mary Poppins Wonderland in the sky, but
upwards,
it's but this idea that like the clouds part and the revelation is, here's my girdle. Like I was taken into heaven.
Wow.
And here's proof that I was, because they open up Mary's tomb and it's empty. It's just her clothes, much like the Jesus factor. Which always wonders is like, was Jesus naked? Like, was it Flash and he suddenly was just naked outside? I mean,
sure.
He's crucified naked, so I guess it's fine when he's
turned into a flock of bats.
Yeah, that modern part of the Dracula movie was really fun.
That was a good scene, right?
It's probably the only actual good scene. Okay, so Jesus bats Mary Ephesus, which is a Dianic, or an Artemisian, at least, Diana of Ephesus, Artemis of Ephesus, cult center, which is always connected to Mary.
Big paps energy.
Multi-paps.
Yeah.
A smear of paps, perhaps.
What other keywords then could we, if we're going to do it like that, the main themes of the Assumption?
I mean, it's a fulfillment of the promises of bodily resurrection.
Right.
Through her being an example. It does kind of bring her to a co-redemptrix status, even if she's not explicitly stated in that way. I do think it is in that co-redemptrix way of like emphasizing a female model for salvific vision. I think those words I just strung together that don't actually mean anything. Salvific vision is a thing, but I don't think it was used properly in that context.
Soteriologically?
Yes. There's definitely some training wheels back on recording after not having done it for 9 months. Can give a talk, can teach a class, but cannot record a podcast. And the rats agree.
It's a very particular set of skills.
Oh, dear God.
And could we, speaking of that reference, could we describe this as the taking of Mary as opposed to simply the Assumption?
No, I think Assumption does in this, or not consumption,
right.
But it is taking, is it not? Like
she's taken. Yeah.
Assumptio means she's taken. Like but it's not a ravaging.
Right.
It's not. I mean, it is in soul perhaps, but it's not the, what did they call it when it was not the rape of Proserpina, but like, I think it is ravaging or something like that. There's like another euphemistic term that is the abduction. She's assumed, not abducted. And you're like, girl wasn't abducted. Like it's taken horribly forcibly against her will, and probably it's a different thing. And there is the discussion too of, especially in modern mimetic culture, of was Mary consensually the mother of God, and she actually agrees to it.
Right.
Biblically, there is contextual evidence that.
What's that scene in which Kenneth Grant movie is it? It's one of the ones with the stones, with the sign that pops up going, "Poof, you're pregnant." That's witchcraft.
Yeah. It's just such an interesting thing of like, okay, we can argue historical truth versus scriptural reference, but at a certain point, which begs to our conversation later, perhaps, or predicts our talk, or what I think your opinions are about Aradia. But the idea of I just saw the meme go around of, just for argument's sake, why is it that if I steal something off of a corpse that's 2 weeks old, it's grave robbing, but if you do it off of somebody who's 200 years old or an Egyptian tomb, you're an archaeologist? And I mean, it's a different set of skills and perhaps purposes, but you're still making your money as an archaeologist grave robbing.
Right.
Perhaps. I'm not saying all archaeologists do this. But the idea of how old does the mythology have to be permissible as legit mythopoetic expression?
Yeah.
And I think we're also at a time in our culture, in the West specifically, where popular fictitious characters, I mean, like post-chaos magic, of course, I mean, you and I both have more than a heavy dose of chaos in us, and which is, there are two wolves inside me. One is a chaos and the other is a traditionalist, and it's just a strange thing. But, you can live your bliss in one tradition if you want. Just at the Veracity Symposium, Corinne Boyer was mentioning how Hollywood is really, in many ways, the moving forward of many of our traditions. It's a really strange thing of our lore, a lore keeper, because we re-envision what the lore is based on what our memory sees, and we see things in movies. Right. So, who of us still haven't seen it? I don't think you have either. The Witch.
No, I haven't.
It's really funny because it's totally like, okay, traditional craft, and I am like, yes, all the way. But it's interesting because the people who wanted that had that as part of their aesthetic of witchcraft already, or their understanding, were like, yes, representation. And other people were like, oh yes, I've always been into goats and like this kind of Americana colonies, like let's explore what this is. And it became something that pushed not only art culture and folk horror forward, and helped reestablish folk horror as a genre that meets today's really like hunger for that. but it also affected our traditions much. There's an increased rise on those things. So if Santissima Muerte appears in popular culture on TV, people get more exposed to it. There is the lovely clapback of people pretending they were always into something that they've just seen.
Of course.
We talk about this with everything from the Cyprian revival to whatever the flavor. You can. Somebody publishes a book on and suddenly there's 80 billion people who have grandmothers that initiated them into that tradition that had not written a book or know anything about that, but somehow the very specific things listed in the book are what their grandmother taught them. And it's that whole, like, you start seeing emails and things in groups or personal emails and be like, I had a dream about this very specific set of things. That's the third paragraph down in Wikipedia.
Right.
And I don't know, I guess I'm a lot softer than I was 20 years ago, where I'm not angry about that as much anymore, of just like, your enthusiasm is great. That's great, but also how can we work on transitioning into a state of confidence where you can just be like, this is really amazing. I have a deep respect for people who are like, I wasn't taught anything, I learned everything from books, and it's been 15 years of trial and error and like dirtying my nose and like making horrible mistakes.
Sure.
And like there's that side of it too, and then other people that are learning.
What's the difference between do you want to get the information, or do you want to get some perspective on that information as well?
Or do you want to be recognized as someone who has the information?
Right.
Which is its own... Knowledge is great. We're both like, yes, let's
pro knowledge.
Yeah. Pros
Stick your necks
knowledge.
out there.
But
so controversial.
There's also the point where you're having a conversation and you can tell when someone is interested in promoting the idea as opposed to themselves. And so this is the thing, when someone comes up and offers a new vantage on it, it's like, oh, great, let's talk about that. As opposed to, unless there's times where you can tell it's genuinely like, this goes against everything I've ever read on the subject, heard about the subject, witnessed about the subject. So with a grain of salt, what are your sources again?
Yeah.
But I think there's something of like, when you want the conversation, it bears a little bit of the Eleanor Roosevelt quote, right? Of, small minds talk about people, and then it goes up to events and then ideas. And I don't know, if we're talking, even tying it back to the Assumption of Mary, I assume, as an event from Mary, it's significant mythologically because of the promise of Christ, but it also lays the groundwork as the event that we will all experience in Christ light, of going bodily into resurrection, where I think in modern parlance, because we don't even separate physical resurrection from spiritual resurrection, right, that we don't necessarily assume bodily resurrection is going to happen. It's just the person's already in heaven, which it goes against early Catholic doctrine, early church doctrine. They're like, no, they're nothing right now. Until the judgment card pops up for the whole world.
Untap all lands.
Like the zombies will rise. Like it's that, that until the zombie apocalypse happens, we're not there. The rapture is not supported biblically, but the idea of a bodily resurrection tradition, we're waiting for that trumpet blast. And Mary is already there. This is one of the evidence that saints are already in heaven, is that they're performing miracles. They can listen to us because they're conscious.
Because they exist in an intermediary state.
Yes. So they are brought into Christ's light already because they experience it so much on earth, and therefore can intercede on our behalf with the deity complex.
At the right hand of God.
Yeah. Or the ear of God if you're Saint Monica, I believe, which is always just fun. Because of her role with her son, but that she liberally turns the ear of God and is said to really whisper directly into his ear, which is always weird to think of, like the creator God having ears.
Yeah.
I know we're made in his image biblically, but there is still the witch in me that's like, I'm confused by this. Plus I do enjoy the kind of Congolese understanding that image of God means the desire to create.
Yes.
That our ability and desire to create is what makes us like God more than anything, not a guarantee that God is, a 6'1" strapping man with, chest hair and glutes, or so. I don't know why that's what apparently I'm dating God.
Daddy.
It is, that's what it is. It's, oh God. That's a whole other, okay. I feel very attacked. In a good way. Consensual attacking. Okay. So a
Dianic festival.
Yeah.
Is it worth talking? Like I don't. I do. We have other things that I want to get to as well. But
talk about it.
No.
Let's talk about talking about it.
Let's talk about talking about it. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's.
How to make it 20 minutes instead of 2?
What do you mean, just semantics?
Did you miss us?
Hiya. So Ian the Ferragosto, right, has connections to the Aminals, right? The
that means animals, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Your Italian's much better than mine.
That's definitely not Italian. It's definitely cutesy voice. So there's this connection to beasts, right? Beasts of burden, horse races, I think, especially as well. Which again, this distinction between what's going on, not even folklorically, just with folks, and what has happened already. You know, this is something that seems to have been going on since what the BC, right?
Before Christ. I think it's actually a really good thing here.
It's Ferragosto, right?
Yeah.
It's August. It's one of the Augustuses. So it's been happening for a fair old while, but the idea of like where it goes in terms of what people actually do, and what it meant for people doing it in the, you know, in the 50s or the 40s or the 20s of the previous century, as opposed to, you know, casting the net right the way back and saying, because it started, our earliest encounter of it is this, it must have something still of that to it. And that's interesting. Is that the case? Is it? Are we talking about a seed that still fundamentally bears something of that resonance, or are we talking about something that, as a you know, living festival, can amalgamate various other bits and pieces and become something so separate from itself? And at what point is it just happening to slot back into a calendar of mid-August stuff, and thus gets like reincorporated as well? We have all these different things on the same mantelpiece right now, so I guess we're inherently going to be looking at the relationship between them.
Well, it brings up a lot of things that I'm sure, I mean, stop me if you heard this before, because we have themes in our own explorations, and it's hard to remember what the hell we talked about on previous episodes, so I apologize if this is repeating, but radical monotheism in Western culture, insert author's name here, talks about value centers. And the importance of value centers. So if you are a fishing culture, that you would need to have fishing deities that support your fishing culture needs. And if a religion comes in, it must adapt, which is the thing about Catholicism. I know there's it through the history of our podcast, Catholicism, the idea of folk Catholicism has risen in high prominence within the magical community in the West. It has always been a thing in Latin American magic, of course, because this is one of our bigger topics, of course, of looking at Catholicism and Protestant effect upon the need for pagan magic to be before Christianity or contemporaneous with it.
Right.
And Catholicism is universal, not in the sense that I believe it is meant to be the one correct thing, but as an umbrella, it doesn't try to undo, it just incorporates and says, as long as you believe that you are going to pay us, we do not care.
But this is the issue of incorporation,
yes,
right? and a rearticulation, which is something that we may well get to in talking about Leland and Aradia. Is like one of the things that's done there is this response to, well, some of this stuff doesn't look old pagan, it looks Catholic, but Catholicism is just stealing old pagan stuff anyway. And so
but Leland is still American, is the thing. So there's still that American Protestant egalitarian thing of I mean, the Church of England revolted against the Mother Church and nothing bad horribly happened. And so, like, it's okay if you want to reject modern Anglicanism, Episcopalianism, you can look beyond Christianity. You can skip past it and go back. But in a Catholic worldview, if you didn't revolt against it, there's no reason to. I mean, when that Mary inherits Diana's epithets, it's a natural evolution and it meets the needs of your society. So the idea of
which is the issue, right? Incorporation and synthesis and change and mutation don't occur as the conscious effort of someone sitting down with a cup of tea and a copy of 777, as we've said many times before, right?
Yes.
But the issue here is the
but the leaders could. That's the thing about it, right? So there's choice sets that can be there, like when we talked about syncretism before.
Well, dogma is always top down.
Yeah. Well, okay, in the sense of syncretism being the dominant culture exerting its effect on the less dominant culture, and that there is choice to mask certain things as other things. This in the ongoing discussion of dual observance that and as that term becomes more in vogue because of folk Catholicism being more known about, but also going back to Chumley's references of it and things like this.
But you can't take a reach around and say the elements of. You can't just say that a saint is just the Catholic face that got put on an earlier pagan goddess.
Not by the immediate second generation. That's what we can learn from the Caribbean. Of you can say that the Cabildo chose Saint Barbara because of its connection to explosions, gunpowder. She's dressed in red and therefore reminds them of Shango, and she masks for Shango as a saint. But inside the religious views of Santeria, there is no Saint Barbara's not what's put to your head. Shango is. But the children who are not initiated in that religion fuse the two into one entity, and Saint Barbara becomes a child of Shango in her lifetime. She bears the resemblance of this, and things become syncretic in that way. The culture blends those things. It's not a choice. There's not a dogmatic one person deciding what this is, unless they read a book.
But that's
or apparently make a movie.
It's the lived practice rather than a theological or a folkloric. Theorizing. It's not an interpretive model at that point, which is one of the things that I think is important to talk about if we're going to talk about Leland and Aradia. If we get to that.
Well, we're already getting to it.
Oh, we're in
I mean, we might as well skip to the end of that already because it does tie. I mean, like the suggestion here, and I invited Al to talk about his resistance to talking about Aradia.
That was just because I didn't want to do extra homework on the way here. Remind myself of things that I got tired about arguing about years ago.
Well, I find it interesting with Aradia because she has received a kind of boost in current political climate as a figure for the rebellious witch. And it's interesting that we don't use rebellious witches that have earlier extant because there is this mode in the magical community that earlier is better. Earlier is better. The Greek magical papyri are the source for all magic that follow it.
Right.
Even though they're like the scrap table notes. So this idea, and which completely goes in the face of folk Catholicism, which doesn't care about date. It's like, but I pray to this saint and the rain comes, so fuck your dates. Which, to misquote Al of, I can't hear your argument over actual...
Your book review over the weight of historical evidence.
Yes.
Or historical usage, crucially. Right?
Well, yeah. Even if there's a typo in a book, if people have been getting results with that typoed version, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's a hole in magical theory? Is it just belief? Is belief a tool that we're using as magicians, as people involved in this worldview? Or does the plant actually matter? Does it matter that hyssop is not hyssop? Like, what is it? Is it a good substitute? Is it a complete fabrication and mistake? With Aradia, as far as tapping into ourselves and applying a psychological model, which once you understand psychology's effect on the Western world and then magical thought, which it is intrinsically its origins are tied into.
Oh, sure. Soul revealing.
We cannot go back to an early modern worldview the same way, or a pre-modern worldview, because it's always going to be there. Astrology will involve natal astrology to the point where, like, well, what does it mean that my sun is here and my moon is here? It doesn't. I don't know if meaning is the same word, and we have to predicate all those things, especially when magic is inheriting thousands of years, and now with the internets and its availability and the democratization of knowledge to a point, and translation of so many texts, that now people who have never studied another language are having access to so many texts that are now switched to their linguistic worldview, and are not breaking apart, even by the structures and strictures of a language that automatically break you apart when you're reading in another language. Now it's interesting. Things are going to change.
Yeah.
Okay, so Aradia.
Okay. We're familiar with what it is. That's probably the easiest thing to do, right? It's the, I want to say, second. It's worth talking about. Etruscan Roman remains as a thing that's what 1892, and then I think 1897 you get Aradia itself, which is
97 or 99 or something like that.
Okay, which is said to be the record of a particular gospel, a particular evangel. Is that what they call it? Yeah.
Evangelo, yeah.
Of a source that Human Leland has found and established.
The Britishism there, my man? He's specifically my man. I have not slept with him nor known him, sir.
All right, our fella,
Yeah.
our guy on the ground,
As an amateur,
our fearless correspondent.
yeah, as someone who amateur archaeologist, ethnographer, and all these other things, like certainly he is a kindred spirit,
Sure.
and now he's pulling out Hutton,
Mm-hmm.
who was his advisor, I believe.
Yeah, I have my own.
He has his own
traditions
gospel.
Yeah, I certainly have my own traditions that I'm trying to live up to. Yeah, I do. So we have a text from. She's from. I was checking. She's meant to be. She's Maddalena is meant to be from the Romagna region, far to the east of Florence, and
But Tuscan.
yeah. But she's pulling out a bunch of stuff that she is at points saying is more a family tradition, and at points he's interpreting as a older underlying pre-Christian survival goddess.
He's a pre-Murrayist Murrayist.
Yeah.
I mean, the Murrayist fallacy is a huge thing that plays into. I mean, I love me some Murray. I love the possibility of its identification and its huge influence on Gardner and neo-paganism is wonderful, but it's also symptomatic of the blindness of Western culture, and especially Anglo-centric Western culture, where in talking about another deity, it's, oh, well, that deity is essentially like this one for us. If that was reversed, would you agree with this statement? It's that type of understanding of like, oh, we should have a universal language. Okay, then let's make it, Hindi. Well, no, it would be much easier if it was. Yeah, it would be easier for you if it was on terms that you understood.
Mm-hmm.
But this is part of the thing of like this desire for an organized religion. Mm-hmm. One, in combination with the idea of a text, and because of the Bible's influence in our stuff, we can't get away from this idea of the text. That like, why would a family tradition, like, I don't write down how my family does Thanksgiving.
Right.
And there are similarities between the way that my parents do Thanksgiving based from their family's ideas of Thanksgiving.
Right. Well, the easy answer to that, which then opens up a whole other set of doors of questions and problems, is would you turn up and pay people? Which is what he did. He would turn up and say, I've got this shiny bag of gold for you if you can spin me a tale. And boy, could they spin him some tales. Magdalena herself is said to like move house so she can go and find more things to sell to him.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that isn't to say that...
That's the loudest he's spoken, I'm just going to say.
Well, I'd say on the screen. That isn't to say that those things aren't traditions, aren't values, aren't articulations, and there is something to be said for a tradition, especially a tradition, I don't want to say explained, but shown or hinted at to some sort of outsider, that you would spin it in a particular way, that you would... have a particular set of emphases and de-emphases. That's
well, we all consider our audience too, and so if someone wants to hear something and is paying you to hear something, you're going to cater to them, even unless you're the most trained person not to.
Right.
We're going to try and please our audience. This is human communication instinct.
Yeah.
What is the... Okay, so historical evidence for Aradia aside, because we have very late 19th century, and then it moves into this idea of, and it's appropriated or ingrained into the kind of creation of the Wicca and neo-paganism as the goddess name in
there's a cosmology, right?
Yeah.
It's establishing not just here's a bunch of things that people practice, but here's the goddess they worship, who is the daughter of Lucifer. And depending on the way, so there's explicit cosmology. There's also a bunch of implicit cosmology, right? The love spell that seems to suggest that this is a Cain cult as well. There's
the Cain and the Moon, yeah.
Right. There's nice little bits and pieces that. So there's some flat pack to it that you can play with yourself, and there's also some established strictures that you have straight out of the box, not bespoke.
I mean, one of the things that I find so fascinating about the actual gospel, which in the 90s was available, but like there was a lot more talking about it as a source for early Wicca. And the odds, the differences between the type of magic and cult that was described in Aradia versus what was promoted as all witchcraft by a certain publisher who has done great things as well.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of the authors in the late 80s and through the 90s were buying into the Murrayist idea and promoting that all magic was in some form a version of Wicca or neo-pagan ideas that stem from a similar time period. which is seeped in its own...
You still see that argument happening on forums and things of people arguing at cross purposes about what, whether Wicca is a denomination of neo-paganism or a summation of it, or an expression, or the ultimate, original, or any number of other versions of that thing.
I mean, it's really lovely, and I wish it makes lovely internal sense, as any tradition that's worked more than, like, in your head will. It will iron out the kinks, and you'll find, like, okay, I have to fill this in and do this. The idea, though, of torturing a deity in effigy to get what you want, in the 90s, people were like, you couldn't do that. You would never. No, the goddess is love, and we can't do this thing. And how dare you do that? I'm like, this is you torture saints. You torture God. You tell Jesus that the world will end because you have authority over him. You've got the wafer in your hands, goddammit, and it's going up my vagina soon. Like, what can this mean? The ideas of magic expressed in it. There does seem to be a lot of folk magic belief that is consistent with older ideas of, or at least certainly previous to, mid-20th century conceptions of time, space, and magic.
For sure, and we get two, important points to raise. One really kind of praising Leland, and one kind of presenting some problematics. Which is that on the one hand, it's this division of what gets called, at least in English, cunningcraft, from and part of folk magic, and also what gets called witches and witchcraft. And on the one hand, Leland, can be praised for having a sensitivity that didn't seem to be as standard at that time, which was to say, this stuff they're doing that we're starting to call cunningcraft isn't as organized as a faith, but it's a lot more than just a bunch of independent, completely individuated magical practitioners. There's clearly a tradition of some sort going on. There's clearly something being observed here that links these kinds of practitioners. The difficulty is that, having said that this exists in an interesting space between religion and sorcery, if we want to use that term, that he utterly conflates often. There is conflation that occurs between what is what we would call a cunning woman and a witch, and we get this in a variety of languages. The difference between talking about Bestrager and Stregeria.
Well, even the idea here playing on media, because this comes in from Romanticism and is directly a result of the femme fatale, the vampire novels, and things that were arriving in the 19th century. Even previous to that, previous century, it's starting to sneak in. So the idea that a witch is a misunderstood woman is different then from classical or pre-modern and even modern ideas, early modern ideas, that a witch is not human.
Right.
Or that there's a difference between a sorcerer, who is still human, that even when Discovery of Witchcraft, right, talks about sorcerers commanding demons, whereas witches worshipping them.
The devil.
The devil, okay. So this is an important distinction. And dealing with Julia, who's a specialist in Perennian and Catalonian witchcraft, this is a big thing that she emphasizes it in her lectures at the Veritas Junior Symposium and her personal work. But when you're dealing with Spanish culture, if you're dealing with borderland Mexico or things like that, witches are not human. They are part demon, or they have exchanged. It's a little bit Buffy the Vampire Slayer. A part of their soul is now replaced by something else. Right. And the idea that Anglo-centric magic owns the term witch and therefore understands what is meant when anyone uses that word shows the degradation in our own ideas about what debate is, where you have to predicate what you mean by a word when you first say it. You can't react to someone's use of the word like, what did you mean by that? You have to find out. Because if my grandmother used the term witch, she in many ways would be described as a witch by many people, and we even parlance-wise might call someone a bruja. But you would never accuse someone of being a bruja. Like, that is a modern phenomenon that has now influenced especially Mexican culture, post-90s, post-Llewellyn, post-internet especially, because there is this idea, again, that foreign magic is more interesting, and that therefore you get people in Mexico and Brazil that are looking to Wicca as the real magic, buying into that idea, and discarding and disregarding local traditions of folk magic and actual systems that our Westerners are trying to get access to, which is an interesting thing. And this is...
Everybody wants someone else's stuff.
Yeah, and I just made my own fallacy, which I jokingly at the Cornwall conference, when someone said, it was the first time it appeared in the West, and it was like, Spain is the West. Like, Western Hemisphere is still the West. But there's a separation. There's a one-way permeable boundary as to what that West is, and what the idea of what that West is when it's, everything's designed to serve the Great White North of Canada and the United States. Okay. So why is Mary, as a possibly fictitious person, we don't know where she died, but we're going to say Ephesus or Jerusalem or all these other things, and the assumption of Mary, which is a tradition, has understanding of it, and once we get past the kind of grade school idea, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but like the understanding that many people of us have when you're learning dogma, that like this has always been this way. You don't tell a 3-year-old that they shouldn't hit people, or that they should hit people sometimes, or whatever it is, whatever your beliefs are. But like the 10 Commandments are very plain, that religion has to cater. This is like too many things coming at once. Sorry. That you, when talking about religion, and as far as controlling masses, commanding masses of people, not the rights, that in order to establish yourself in a group of people, your tradition usually, if you want to incorporate more people, has to cater to more people, which means you cater to the mystic and the idiot. And that telling someone cause no harm to someone else is necessary so that the idiot doesn't hurt someone else. But if someone is attacking your family, like what's the moral place there? Does God say don't defend your family? Mm-hmm. Early Christians laid down their lives rather than pick up a sword.
Right.
But we don't do that anymore. Now it's send people to war in the name of Christian. By the time you get to Constantine, that's already changed. Mm-hmm. Of like Inoxino Vinci. But Vinci. But okay. I guess it's the thing of the archaeology meme again. With Aradia, the references to Aradia or Herodias as a thing of it. Is it just lovely that it sounds like Herodias, who does have a tradition in Europe as being connected to witch goddessry, which is another figure I'd love to examine.
Oh, sure, the murderess of the Baptist.
Yes, this connection to this and her punishment for that, her being sent into the air, and in Spain being connected to the Aurora Borealis, and therefore cannot touch the ground, and that either Herodias or Salome is said to have been walking across a frozen lake and dies with her head frozen. Her own head is severed. And so there's this thing of dying in water for the daughter, but the mother is still in air. The stepmother, who's actually her sister, who's not, depending on the relationship.
Oh, how about that? Strange interrelations between a senior female figure of the air and a senior female figure of the water.
What?
Yeah, connected once again.
Magic as incest, never. Keep the power pure. Keep the power pure.
The father, nothing.
Yeah, slut. Which means the end, apparently, in some in the Haksan Scandinavian dialect. Okay, so
yeah, we have a rearticulation of an older set of practices, certainly, or a. So there are three. Ronald's position is that there are, which I think he still keeps to, despite the fact that Triumph is what, like, there's been a 20th anniversary collection of essays.
I do remember when it came out. Holy crap!
Yeah.
It was pretty ground shaking.
It's a ways ago. There are three notions of how we might take Aradia and what Leland's doing. The first is that it's entirely true, and this is absolutely accurate, and the
American approach.
Sure, a very literal take that
American Protestant. I mean by that, like
that the Carbonari and countless other sets of Catholic secret police didn't manage to root out this.
My grandmother was a Benedante.
Right. Didn't manage to root out this incredibly established goddess cult that seems to have had enough traditions that someone would have noticed by now. That one seems unlikely, but it's possible. It's possible. The second is that
like
these
true
represent
scientist.
These represent Madalena's actual family tradition, and so while it might not be as Murrayist as this like standard, everyone was
it's not one size fits all,
right?
But there's definitely elements of this.
Yeah. Is another idea, and the third option, which needs to be floated at least as an option, is that he basically made it up. He's not necessarily terribly well regarded in terms of his accuracy about other books. This wasn't his flourish, and he then kind of finished. He wrote many other books as well, many of which have also been discounted as having. Romanticizing as deciding to print the myth instead, and not just because he was the controversial figure that was supporting the witch in the face of the establishment telling him that this couldn't possibly be the case. No, the technical details the training that he may or may not have even received. Not to play that disparage the lineage of people you don't like. But there are arguments to be made that this was not necessarily the work of a scholar who was as interested in intellectual accuracy, responsibility, and veracity as he was in the topic itself, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly seems most people that end up looking at this in any depth seem to suggest that there's a mixture of the second and the third options going on here, with an emphasis on, he's not creating things out of whole cloth. He's taking many different extant things, or the people that he's getting it from, we should bear in mind, are mixing and matching and melanging and referencing back and referencing forward.
Well, to interject real quick,
No.
what's interesting about it, because we see this pattern a lot in modern writings on magic.
Mm-hmm.
The grandmother story is a common thing, and there are some people that actually have grandmothers that taught them things. But I have a family tradition of curanderismo, but I didn't learn anything from my grandmother. I would love that I could have, but she died when I was 11, and so I apprenticed other people later to find out things.
Right.
But I'm not saying that's everybody's story, but there are actual grandmas out there. I've heard. Now,
do move in hood.
Oh, Abuelasaurus. So I guess what's interesting, or something to consider too, is that sometimes there's this automatic assumption that it's nefarious, and the result is nefarious. But I don't think that many people who do this third type of option, I think many of them genuinely believe this because they want there to be this information, and they don't necessarily think that they're doing damage by putting it out there in those terms. Do you know what I mean? I don't. I think that I know people in the pagan community that have done this.
Right.
And as wrong as they are in creating things whole cloth, are their intentions bad? I don't know if that's a really gray area.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I'm not romanticizing it so much as saying, well, if the person can say, because there's often the thing of the grandmother case adding legitimacy to what is otherwise a really beautifully creative system that might, some of them make incredible internal logic and get results for people regardless of historical veracity or not. And what is veracity? I mean,
sure. And my issue is that myth is bigger than something that you just, pull out of a sack.
Myth does not mean fake.
Right. And it's not something that you just pull out of a sack to wave in front of someone's face and shut down an argument about actually interrogating what our ancestors were doing. We see this in the relatively recent controversy with demonolatry, and it seems increasingly the case that this Ducante notion of a family tradition of grimoires is rather more fictitious than some of the authors who've been involved in that corpus of material and a modern tradition have been willing to come forward about. And at what point is that a convenient literary device that you should see through and understand as a myth, and at what point is that just lying to your readership?
Well, this is what I sometimes stop me if you've heard this before, the Masonic impulse of Masonry, which is really hugely an influence on Western magical model, does have this tongue firmly in cheek thing of the ancient rites have been handed down to us and you are entering into the school of mysteries that the Egyptians and the Carpathians and the Martians all have celebrated.
Because we don't sit in a theatre and say, you're not really Coriolanus.
Yeah.
You're an actor playing him, because you're engaged in for want of a better term, the actual psychodrama of the
media is the message.
Right, you're engaged in at that point it's a play.
Yeah.
And you're play. There's play going on.
Not necessarily a ruse.
Right. It's not lying.
Now this is myth.
Yeah.
Expressed mythopoetically in a ritual state where you're being presented with information that the historicity of it is less important than the universal truth that you're gaining through it, but that does not mean that the cultural specifics or the contextualization of it is universal for all people.
Right.
Just because there are different words for sex does not mean that everybody has sex the same way. It's that was a really weird parallel. I'm not sure it's an actual equivalent. I've been full of false equivalencies today. Al will beat me later. But okay, we store up this shit for 9 months, and then it's all got to come out in one giant ejaculatory manner. Okay, so back to Aradia. Key features: poisoner, goes after the establishment that is persecuting her people, that she was sent to Earth to teach people these ways, to free them from the bonds of serfdom.
Right. It is funny how something pre-Christian seems to be reacting so hard against Christianity.
Yes. And okay, so she as a modern figure, she has the growing out of literature traditions, the literary traditions of the noble herbalist / magician, folk magician, who is now achieving semi-divine status because they have power, they are able to affect change, and they are now on the side of the underdog, which you get this messianic property to her, which, okay, this is a really inspirational story.
Yeah. And
you see the thing of it, and it gets changed very quickly when, like, just to bring up the Farrers and their huge research into the Alexandrian Book of Shadows that's in the Witch's Bible, and their early questioning, which was not popular to do, of publishing a lot of it and saying, well, we see these 3 magazine articles that Gardner got this passage from, so maybe he was, and at the time they wrote that, there was no evidence that Daffo existed, that there was this thing that, and they were like, well, maybe he got it from the New Forest Witches, and we know that there was something that he inherited it from, but we don't know what the details of that was.
Right.
And raising the possibility has now, I think, as we move forward and time moves forward, it's kind of like how, the Sunday crossword is answerable by more people on Friday than it was on Sunday.
Yeah. Is that still the case?
Well, that's what I was told. I don't have...
because the other example is used, because that's one of the cases that gets trotted out for collective unconsciousness, right? The case that's used about the monkeys, that learn, monkeys or birds that tool use, and that just merely being closer to the proximity of a bunch of tool using creatures apparently produced tool use.
Oh my god, that's like, okay, yeah.
I'm told that one of those studies is
told by who?
A little bit more questionable now.
Told by whom? A monkey?
Yeah.
This is from the monkey's mouth specifically.
So
who heard it from the bird's cloaca?
Right, he's got it.
All right, cite your sources, Al. Okay, no, that so. Is there this thing that, because we advance forward, and like, especially with the internet, which is its own version of that chicken cloaca to monkey's mouth to Al's ear, but lineage of thought is a good thing, people. All the people in my head I'm addressing. So we question the need for veracity and this is one of the defenses in a lot of traditions, right, where like you holes are poked. Well, that's not the case. I mean, a good example of the opposite of that is like the Dalai Lama, who, when a scientific discovery contradicts Buddhist doctrine, he goes, Buddhist doctrine not necessary to achieve is law anymore.
Right.
Like, there must be a symbolic thing to it. We can explore that, but like, yes, this is the creation of the universe, which is a philosophical tradition by most Western standards, because they don't want to acknowledge that it is a religion.
An appeal to right seeing and all that kind of business, which is legit, a useful thing to do. To say it's more important to look correctly than it is to look at this correct thing. Sure, but is also prone to its own problems of re and uncontextualization of saying, well, this
can you say that modern Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism specifically, is the same as it was 400 years ago? Right. But should it be? And this is something, as an American, we have a constant reference towards the old world and the Sphirot that are Wales and Lincolnshire and Cornwall
and the spurious rigor of this particular Sussex town that you're borrowing craft from to then practice quote unquote traditional witchcraft in your Manhattan apartment.
He's not talking about me. I don't live in Manhattan. So, but there is this side of it, and I think there is a movement here it's happening where people are understanding spirit of place and ancestry in forms that are both destabilizing to traditional structures, but also our American need to kind of put things back to authority that is from the old world, mixed with our complete muddedness and non-inheritance of a unified cultural identity, and complete abhorrence for anything American. So it's, except for, culturally, wait for it, like, what is the one thing that everybody borrows from, steals from, and doesn't seem to feel guilty about until they're pointed out on social media, is hoodoo. Conjure. um, curing, whatever you want to call it, root work. This idea that that is specifically American, but is Afro-American, which is a different influence, and different regionalisms occur, and what is done in one city might have the same exact procedure, but done with a completely different plant. And we don't. This is the true melting pot there.
Right.
But to deny its sources would be foul.
Fallacious.
Fallacious, not. Yes.
Bye, fallacious.
Yeah. Oh God. Okay. But it's that eternal argument that like New American Witchery podcast did that years ago very well, of exploring American holidays as like actual PowerPoints in our year. Why is it that we feel the need to celebrate an ancient Celtic wedding festival of a god that is not worshipped in popular culture, that we don't celebrate for 2 weeks, but we're recording this on August 2nd, so like Lammas is a big thing. It's one of my favorite neo-pagan holidays. The whole idea of a bread lady and a bread man, and like the idea of lady and lord comes from Hlafgard, and like bread maker and bread guard.
Right.
Like bread is life, and this earliest of the harvest festivals. Okay, why is that our day? What is this pastoral nostalgia that applies to a Manhattan carpeted apartment that you're going to celebrate the psychological seeds that you are bearing to come to fruition at the end of the year? Well, does that mean that things you think of now are only going to be harvested next August 1st? I'm very confused by this parallel. But why is it that we don't celebrate with full magical vigor Labor Day as the end of summer that we know it all is culturally? That is when people start going back to school after that, or at least preparing for the fall. Memorial Day is the unofficial start to summer. It's always called that, but it's the unofficial start to summer. If that's when people start going to the beach again, that's when beaches open.
I feel like we are starting to get that with Thanksgiving in terms of its, exploring its Jupiterian values, and in terms of
slaughter of indigenous people.
Right, exactly.
A
response to peeling off the nice white label of it and seeing some of the historical atrocity of it, but then also attempting to have your cake and eat it in terms of using it as both a day of acknowledging great tragedies done to indigenous peoples, and also attempting to find things to be thankful for, and to explore Jupiterian values of family, of the expansion of the table, of even the Thursdayness of it.
Tending the land to use a benefit and like having a relation
is a thing I see magicians doing.
Yes. No, and something I think is every moment can nurture or deplete us, and like hopefully we spend tragedies in our life to be things that are educational to us and move forward in a productive manner. And I guess what you see that there's these articles going around. It brings up the whole idea of what a festival is, but to promote the origin of Samhain, of Halloween as Irish, and this festival that's going to happen to promote Samhain on an Irish idea, which of course just means November, but that Halloween is an extant, sacrosanct, unchanging tradition. Personally, I still think there's this American impulse to tap into the ancient way. Right. That grants legitimacy, as opposed to necessarily like, well, you don't listen to all the pop songs you did from when you were 8. You have nostalgia for them, but like, what is it that refreshes us and moves us forward? That traditions that are stagnant die, and I guess
that corpse then gets rearticulated as well, gets eaten and vomited back up in various forms,
which ties into 2 more of our themes in some way, I guess here. I guess possession there in some way, but as far as the Das Matas impulse, and I'll pick your brain on Hicpath. Aspirated ATs are far more fun. But the idea that Talion law, what that is, that the vices of the forest kingdom in Kimanda are greed and gluttony, spending more than you, or eating, consuming more than you are needing, that it's kill or be killed, that there's a ruthlessness to it, that it's a martial energy, perhaps Jupiterian at times. There's
the expansion of the strangling vines.
Yeah, there's something very difficult about it, in that it is the source of life, and the wild, and our return to the wild, and understanding what is pagal, what is this quote unquote paganness, this untamed thing that we can tap into, and that our spirits derive power from its connection to the world of the dead, whether it's the ocean or the cemetery, and the forest the forest is celebrating the memory of all those things, burying the dead at the roots of trees, their fluids joining the ocean of the dead under there, that we then confine and separate into the cemetery in under colonialism. And then all of those things, the need for nature to renew itself. If something cannot adapt, it dies.
Yeah.
And similarly, interesting theme-wise, if we go to, because I'm jumping around here,
Sure.
Owani, which is the correspondent Odu for Fortuna Major, can't carry water in a basket, the refrain, deals with ideas of stagnation and the importance to stir things up so that things don't get stagnant. It is the dam that holds the water, that you must poke at the dam to let things flow. You cannot just let things stay the same. And that there needs to be a flowingness. A flow. The spice must flow.
Right.
To preserve some notion of progress forward. And there's something interesting in that, in those connections that I see, even in just these themes, right? So Jesus can't stay dead, he has to move on. Mary can't stay alive, she has to move on, but then joins the greater life. Like, it's poking holes in what you think is going to happen. That, interestingly, even if we take that solar and lunar thing of like a lunar goddess now becoming associated with solar festivals, what does that mean? What does that mean when the moon becomes unified with the sun? Her son, in that way, and the Cain and the Aradia coming there, like poking holes in the established order that there is Christian overlords, or there's these things that are causing problems, and that we react and incorporate mythologies that are relevant to our modern times, and the hallmark of a good tradition is its ability to adapt its stories to modern time, to find relevance at least,
Right.
from its collection of mythos to modern phenomena, whether it's a right swing or a left swing, or, times are hard, times are good, whatever it is. But that needs to be there, or the tradition will move on.
Right.
Like, it will be left, is a better way of putting that.
Sure. Has to serve actual needs.
Not just be an escape.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at Hicpath.
Yeah.
Hicpathian.
Or Hicpath. Yeah, spirit under... If we take the model of the 18 who are under Sirac or Skirlin, but then also apply the Grand Grimoire principle of the first 18 spirits, which are technically a different set of spirits, are each applied, 3 of them to each deputy. Then we get certainly Hicpath under Beelzebub, and usually under Flaherty. Those spirits all have a tendency that I consider that guild the kind of research witches, the librarians, and not just because Humutz is also there who brings any book, but the notion of you're in one place and you bring. So Hicpath brings people to you. That's the main thing. It attracts people to physically visit you.
Terrible. Get him out.
How awful.
Is there an anti-Hicpath? Is there a low pact?
Masildi, you go to, well, the opposite is that you go to, allows you to move. They're part of the Rangers Guild.
But why must I visit people?
That's also awful. Yeah. No, there's warding people off, I suppose.
Okay.
But in my experience, Masildi and Hicpath don't get on well together. Having tried to do workings of sending someone to somewhere else, or sending someone to me. So both ends, the thrower and the catcher. But it doesn't work like that at all. They don't get on.
So, I mean, with Eshu Dasmat, that's because even the songs of talking about him running and running and running without end. Like, that's he's always in the forest flowing, working, that the green forest is flowing, but it's also this reference to the predators of the forest and the prey of the forest, and this kind of, seeing being in the forest at midnight and seeing a blinding light, and you think it's day. It's so bright. Again, kind of an eclipse, reverse eclipse notion. But it's really just Eshu Dasmat that's doing his work, or it's Mirim Dasmat that's doing his work, or it's Gaveda Dasmat that's doing it. It's somebody of the woods. And again, the woods carrying this weight of the dead, always. That the trees are the bones of the dead, that they're, if you plant a tree over a grave or bury someone in a tree, that the tree becomes them. There's part of their life forces now in it.
I don't see the comparison too neatly. There are Eshus and devils that seem to be interested in the same kinds of things. I'm not sure I see that too much.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Most of those, I mean, Segal is also in that guild, I believe.
Steven!
Nuts. Look, he's doing it all for his hips. My father criticizing Steven Seagal's Aikido. It's not enough hips. It's all in his elbow. It's too much shoulders.
Sorry, I can't hear you over his successful movie career. It's like when you go to things as an out-of-work actor, like, I could have done that part better.
Or comedians
Yeah.
insisting that someone just isn't funny.
Yeah.
Despite an audience laughing at them. Yeah, he's just not funny.
Just laughing because you don't know any better.
Yeah.
If you saw me,
Right.
I'd laugh at myself all day long. Okay.
Well, even Segal, who, depending on the take, seems to inspire visions or produces chimeras. It's sometimes said, even. Or produces monsters. That's the closest to a wildness that you get in that guild. A lot like the, I suppose bringing someone to you, you then have to have an encounter with them at the doorstep, that kind of thing. But no, they seem to have a lot more of a quality of holding up and experimenting with different ways of doing the same operation. They seem to be very into like the let's test this research. What happens if we stir this 7 times under a new moon rather than 5 times, and we do it anti-clockwise rather than clockwise? And though that seems to be what certainly high pact and hummus seem to be into, in my experience at least.
Sounds like a dish you'd order. Okay. No, that is interesting because it is one of the syncretisms that I would question.
Yeah.
There are many that I question. Pomajira questionings always. The only one that even remotely makes sense to me is the Praia with Hicpath. But that's because of the enjoyment and the spinning and this nature of femininity and what this is. But Hicpath also being all Pomajiras, but does the Praia energy, what is it? That beach, that flamboyance, that attraction.
There's a kind of sort of refreshment with Hicpath.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the sparkly gold of the sands, I suppose. Yeah.
The side of it with Dasmatas is just Dasmatas is not necessarily plants the way that people think of them, and this is because coming from an African modality, the idea of how violent herbalism actually is, of constantly ripping plants and exposing their blood, and that's what we're after, is their precious blood,
the
chlorophyll.
wilds feels kind of a good take. I mean, it's not the woods.
No, but or is it the weeds, or is this concept of what it is, the bush, that, and in the decided delineation in Kimbanda of Dasmatas is everything except the plants in the cemetery is owned by the Dasmatas kingdom and is divided in amongst the different kingdoms, but the cemetery, what grows in the cemetery belongs to the dead. And what's interesting about that is that, okay, well, where is that crossover? Where did the mythology change? When is the archaeologist able to claim it's their job, not a hobby? But if cemeteries are New World, and the concept of burying someone in the forest is there, and they join the ocean of the dead there, when did that crossover happen? Why is Dasmatas there? And is it about the parts of the forest that never get light? I always like that parallel, that certain things hide there. It's the Book of Kells movie, or the creatures that hide in the caves, the places that the forest never gets light, where the canopy is so thick we can't see what's there, and the inherent danger in that.
Sure.
Of what that is. Okay.
In the having checked the clavicular Solomonis de Secretis, the earlier version of the thing that will go on to become Verum, there are some very specific listings that the kinds of people High Pact gives reference.
Give it.
Can make people appear to you that you urgently call for. So there's already a sense of urgency. Seems. If we're stretching and looking for these comparisons, the idea of an urgent need for someone that you bring to you is interesting to me. Whether they're in a remote place or an army or the emperor or your sweetheart.
Let's cover some bases.
Yeah, so it's less it calls these specific people, and I think it seems to be more kind of and this kind of person and this kind of person to demonstrate a sense of everyone-ness. That there's a wider appeal, but that emphasis is made initially on urgency, and whether they're a loner in an army, whether they're an emperor, or whether they're a sweetheart. So whether there's political ties or effect from this person, or whether it's an interpersonal thing. I seem to remember it's high pact that friend and colleague was calling, who was turning up on a golden toad, and they kept making a big deal out of this. So there is a count of summoning high pact and them turning up
for the third and final time tonight. There has been technological errors, and I'm very pleased that Al is going to replace this entire thing once more. Go. Beautiful.
The spirit turns up riding a giant golden toad in one of the early conjurations, and a lot of time is spent exploring with the spirit what this is about. In subsequent conjurations, the spirit turns up without its steed because they seem to have got pissy and frustrated that the steed was getting more attention than they were. This is interesting to me in terms of the way that spirits are depicted as having vehicles or riding things in planetary spirits. Terminology, that's usually that they have a seniority of some kind, but it can also be another spirit that they are literally riding in on, or an expression of something more like the things you get in some certain Celtic myth, where the spirit talks out of the rider's mouth first, and then the horse's mouth second, and is back and forthing. But
Balaam's ass,
as you pointed out the second time, imagine a spirit turning up with toad medicine, getting pissy.
Yes,
who'd have thought?
Yes,
a spirit.
This is our own like Beta Sheet moment of like this is the third creation of the universe, but no one else knows it. Oh. Watch Aronofsky's Mother. I was a fan.
I saw someone do a best woman speech at a wedding once. The whole bridegroom party were massive Doctor Who fans, and her speech was that this is the 6th time this wedding has happened, actually, and here are the 5 times that it all went horrendously wrong and everyone died.
Wow.
That we don't remember now. It was an interesting one because it ended on that high note of like, and here we are doing a nice version, but it did describe in quite epic detail like various deaths of various people in the room. Which I'm
actually a fan of that. That's great.
Half the audience was totally on board with it. The younger half, I think, is probably fair to say, with the exception of a very jovial uncle who was clearly loving everyone saying anything that allowed him to cheers it. That's a tangent up on a tangent.
Welcome to Radio Free Golgotha.
Hello.
So the reason that we give ourselves 12 topics is because there's going to be tangents. I see your tangent and raise you a return to subject. That Eshu Dasmatas is used to draw someone that has left you back to you, so lovers, friends, and to find your way out of the forest, which could be applied euphemistically, metaphorically, to out of a situation, but generally actually means the forest, like right. Help me get out of the woods. So I think that it's worth pointing out that the workings come from a time period that was seeking to justify and sell African traditions as valid and equal to European ones based on theosophical comparisons and things like this. So it's hard to know whether those writings were done out of actually talking with the spirit, because most people now tend to use Eshu Dasmatas as a healer, as an alchemist, as someone who is promoting plant knowledge and poisons as well, whether it's plants to cure or heal or plants to harm, as opposed to using them to return a lover. So is that from a time period? Because if we're going to deal with possession cults, is a nice segue into possession for the second time. Mm-hmm. Good God, if we recorded every episode twice,
once more with
we'd just speak really fast and like shortcut things, and then without our actual footnotes, we'd be even more confusing.
Because we're so slow usually.
Oh yes. Well, I am a super speedy snail. Okay, so possession-wise, a lot of the workings that are given in these books do not take into account possession, which is interesting to me.
Right.
So the Kimbanda books from the 50s through the 60s tend to present these workings as like, here's the ingredients of a spell, and it's folk magic that is slightly offering to a spirit that should be doing the work for you. You leave it in the woods and they do the magic. But within a possession cult, there is also possession that happens where they take over the body of someone and the spirit is doing the work. So the spirit is asking for things a la old school witch of like, bring me the left, front nipple of a cow, mm-hmm. and the hair of a priest and the placenta of your third child.
Right.
and I will do the things. And you don't even know, like, maybe they just want that because they need that for something else. Maybe they promise someone else they do something that's, like, who knows why they need those things, because you get there and they're just like, hold this candle, it is done. And you're like, wait, what? Yeah. There's a lot of that I think echoes the mythic trope of the witch in the forest in that way. And so the other side of that is, like, spirit possession, you're not there most of the time. If it's full possession, you're not learning things the same way. You have to be trained in a very different way because the spirit takes over for you. So the idea of what a mount is, what a horse is, it's very difficult. In some traditions, as far as like Afrodiasporic traditions, in some of them you must be able to be possessed in order to initiate others, because you can't transfer spirit without possession. But the West has a weird relationship with possession, where it's almost an exclusively negative connotation. And there are different forms of it, even within HRs, where we talked about getting touched. And I mean, like, we can discuss the problematic nature of using the term ATRs. There's African traditional religions, or ADRs, Afro-diasporic religions. Not all of them are religions. Not all of them are diasporic. Not all of them are traditional. What is traditionalism? Like, again, predicate these words. But it is the word that is used to describe, as an umbrella term, many of these Western and Central African traditions that crossed through the slave trade and were modified to fit the landscapes of the Americas.
So could we set up a spectrum? Is that useful? At one end of it, we have you completely black out and wake up covered in plants and things, and someone saying, "Thank you so much. You just, the spirit that
or in jail, or something,
or in jail, or covered in."
Man, I was so drunk, I don't remember what happened.
That type of, like, frat bro experience. Yeah, totally. Possessed by your lust. Totally a possibility.
And then we have somewhere in the middle around a thing that gets called two-headedness sometimes.
Yes. Two-headed, or extreme sitting on or being touched, or there's different so being ridden but not completely, where you're still there in some way, where it's not complete loss of consciousness. And there are varying degrees as to what you can do with your body during that point. Are you watching? Are you witness? Are you watching through your own eyes, but the body and voice are doing their own things? Are you able to manipulate your body if you need to? Are you able to... and these are various things that are talked about in different forms of shamanism and possession traditions, of, like, the need that when a new spirit is coming in, that you need to be able to stay present, because you need to be able to tell your body, no, snap out of it, this is not a good spirit, which is training. Different notions of possession as they occur, even within the same broad traditions, like the Orisha spectrum, that in Cuban tradition we expect the Orisha to come down and know all the protocol, and it will perform the exact things to show it. It will be tested and it will be fine. In Brazil, you're trained. The Orisha is trained into the body.
It's more like they've got a new car and they need to learn how to drive the new car.
So it is still tested to see if it's the Orisha, but there is a moment of, well, not a moment, there's 7 years of learning to have that Orisha come into your body and actually do the things it needs to do. And there are various levels of that, where, you're watching for signs of possession in seances, in misas, in giras, in shires, in bembes, or whatever it is, that someone who starts to move in a different way, that's the sign that the spirit is coming. So what is this abstract spirit of air that is entering? Is it a dead thing? Is it a god? Is it a saint? Like, how are we defining it? And what's the difference between possession versus the Brazilian term incorporation? Incorporação is such a beautiful term of, like, incorporation happens from a spirit that intrinsically has a contract with you and has already physically been installed in the body. So, or the idea that Orisha incorporate because they are tied to your essential nature, and especially after initiation, they're manifesting both outward in and inward out. That there's a meeting that happens at the nape of the neck. Versus possession, the dead always possess, because the dead are foreign to us. Even though they're in our body, they are not living entities of life. They are of the dead. They have to possess the living again. So possession is used for all of that, but in the West, possession has such a negative term of being a non-consensual relationship with a demon, usually. And it's one of those interesting things in talking with practitioners, other people in these traditions, in various traditions, about the consensual nature that is not there when possession starts. The reason somebody goes and trains as an espiritista, 10 years, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, was because when they were 6, all of a sudden they were talking to their invisible friend, and their invisible friend possessed them. and the parents are like, get them to someone that can stop this.
Yeah.
That possession by a god force means that god walks you up to the temple itself and says, initiate me, and they're like, haha, you're like, no, I'm here, initiate the body so that I can do this again. Always preparing the body to receive possession more easily, which is its own thing there too. There was the story of a Nigerian woman who had a dream about this specific, I think, point in a river inside a religious compound, and there were no women allowed in that part of the compound, but she was bathing one day in another part, and she got possessed by the deity, walked into the compound and said, initiate me and prepare this, and she came out of it days later, but the spirit, when it was there, knew everything it was supposed to do. It walked up to the right people, gave the right signs that it was there, and said, you must prepare this person to be able to function in this way. So I find that interesting too, that possession as it is not a solitary event. Possession for solitary reasons, that does border on demonic. Like, why does it need to be there unless you have an agenda? If you are building a spirit something for somebody, like you have a relationship where someone brought you the materials the spirit requested through divination or an earlier trance possession, and now the person leaves and you go into your trance and you come back the next morning and your feet are cut up and there's some nice little bundle in the corner and a note that says, feed me 4 times a day. That's some pretty advanced possession right there. But what is that versus someone feeling, I feel the spirit at their shrine, and they're like, oh no, I started to black out. Okay, I mean, like, that's not valuable.
Yeah.
It's most of the time the spirit is coming down to do something, and the West's, I feel, my critical voice coming in, which sounds like this, that the idea of satiating the need for ecstasis or otherness and mistaking rushes of emotion, newness, or sensation for possession. What are you being possessed by? We can expand that on another level of, is it the dead or a god? Is it, in Kimbanda terms, is it a Kiyumba or a Mavambo? Is it an Eshu Pomajiro? Or is it a shell of something posing as that?
Right.
And how can we prevent against those things? Well, there's a reason that these traditions are usually initiatic, or at least mentor-based. Like, you can go into something like Kachimbo, which doesn't have an initiation structure so much, but you train for a long time and then you're recognized, which is still an initiation structure. You're initiated through contact and through training. Whether or not there's a specific event that says from this point you are now AD instead of BC.
Right.
Anywhere from 77 BC to 112 AD could be Jesus era. But I think the destruction of the Second Temple kind of kills it at 65, but hey. Okay, so yeah, I think those different forms of possession are all interesting to talk about. Since this is the third creation or the second creation or something, or either on Lilith or Eve, I'm not sure, or Steve, you were talking, because I brought up channeling as a Western equivalent of there's still a presence involved when someone says they were channeling something, usually in the parlance, that I'm channeling. I've been to many a festival where people are channeling Gaia.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know why you're channeling the tightness herself, but they're beyond tightness, the original deity.
Well, this is interesting, right? Do we take possession as being primarily a... Channeling suggests to me more that there is information being passed on. But this fits a lot more with a thing I have heard called aspecting as well, where, what's actually happening is that you're hearing the spirit or the god or whatever telling you a thing and you're passing it on. And
that's what aspecting is?
That was what it
as opposed to
that
aspect.
was what it was described to me at a festival once by someone. I don't know,
to be clear, I have no idea what he means by the term festival when he uses it, if it's music or magic or the Wizards Gathering in the Shire. But okay.
Yes. I'm so mysterious.
And you shall know him by his ways.
But this is the difference, right, between I felt this presence and I felt like it was they seem to start with these accounts seem to start with the information that's being passed on rather than the sensation, rather than a more embodied thing. And again, to stand for Ochoa's Society of the Dead, this idea of contact begins with the body as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't begin with It doesn't even necessarily begin with memory, or I was suddenly just that Proustian thing that can be spirit contact of like, why am I thinking about like this particular thing, or why am I like veering into this kind of half vision at this point, or what? I mean, I guess why do I feel cold spots starts to be a bit more embodied, but the notion of like, why is my elbow twinging in this way? Or not why is it, but an awareness that this is happening, and that this can be a sign of a particular set of spirits or kind of spirits, or
yes, absolutely,
or individual spirits. Like this is how because Grandpa's coming because my knee's acting up again.
Yeah,
and this starting with the body rather than being a thing that starts with the mind or the logos that eventually spills out into the body. That coalesces out of.
Well, you bring up an important connection there with a lot of transpossession, African transpossession traditions come out of dance prayer.
Right.
So kinetic prayer, kinetic movement that aligns you to a rhythm, that allows a room to enter into a rhythm together to, quote, pull the energy of, pull the ashe, the force, or whatever you want to call it, and create this chain that allows something to manifest. And that the goal... What's interesting when I see a criticism, I have seen many different types of drummings within various traditions, Vodou, Santeria, Kimbanda, Umbanda, Candomblé. The difference of elders when they notice that someone else is starting to possibly be touched by a spirit, they're very aware. And they kind of corral and help push the spirit into the person. Younger people get very excited that something's happening and they either stop and stare, or they get so obsessed with their own sensations that they're not helping guide. The point is to have something come down in someone, not necessarily you. Being possessed does not make you special. You are a vessel. You are not important except to serve as the meat puppet. So this de-emphasis of the individual's importance as a possession vehicle influences even how we treat people that have a bout of psychodramatic possession or actually being touched by the spirit, but nothing fully comes. Great, sit them down, give them water, but don't gather around them, because you don't want to start programming to the person that they're going to get attention or that they're going to be babied because of this. Investigations can be done, training can be done. We can investigate why the spirit didn't come, or is it actually trying to come, or what was the need. Maybe it just needed to come down and that person was like in the right place at the right time. But the idea that you're special because you channel or because you mount something, you are, but it's service to the spirit or the deity, as opposed to an unwilling possession by a demon. And that whole relationship of like, why do we study? Because you were possessed as a child and you had to be like, this needed to stop. Why do we seat spirits? Why do we build dolls for them and things like this? Sometimes in possession religions, is to allow the spirit to have a place to go that's not your body. So no, you go there. That's where you live. Yeah. In the same way that we could do the reverse and talk about like a govi on a voodoo altar, like your spirit has to go somewhere when you are being taken. I also love Paulo's reminder that in a transpossession model, specifically he's talking about Orisha here, but it applies to many of the modalities, that everyone is possessed right now. You are possessed in your body by your head, by your consciousness, which is sometimes put aside to allow room for another spirit to come in or another deity. And the Ori is it's your personal deity. So it is this concept that your consciousness is linked to a heavenly consciousness that is a potential as well. There is a parallel, a kind of bilocation thing happening that tries to realign when you're sleeping, which is why sleep medicine, why coucher loa happens, why Ori medicine, you pray to the head and you feed it right before sleeping, that these things merge. But that you are possessed right now by your consciousness. And at night, when you sleep, it's traveling. So it is visiting heaven again in bouts. It's going through these things. Now, if we explain that outside of like the primitivist idea of like explaining what happens when we dream, because there are many ways to look at what happens to our consciousness when we're asleep. A lot of people don't remember their dreams. We know that you would not be healthy if you weren't dreaming. Right. So most people are dreaming and perhaps not remembering it.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that you're still, upon waking, your Ori comes back into your body. And when do you thank your Ori? First thing when you get up, thank you for bringing me to this day, because nothing enters into the body without the consent of the Ori. And so this means that possession does not happen unless the Ori allows it, which is also interesting.
Right.
So this idea of consent is already built into the system, that the Ori allowed the spirit, the demon, whatever it was, to come in. So what does that mean? Does that mean you're weak in your spiritual defense? It's not, and I think we have to stop just short of victim blaming here for people who are doing this. But like, what is the hole in the person's consciousness? Not Ori is not perfect,
right?
And the concept of it allows for faulty Oris, bad Oris, that you were in a hurry and you just wanted to get here, so you just picked the first piece of fruit you saw, and that's your Ori for this lifetime. But our heads have different potentials. So if the deity possessed you at age 7, it's because the Ori has a relationship with that deity, and it's like, we need to do this. We need to find the body medicine now, because the head can only do so much if the body's not prepared.
Yeah.
Long talk.
Sorry. You picked this particular part of the Sesame Street magic. What was your motivation?
I was interested in what it means to not just be assumed into heaven, but what it means to have heaven assume into the onto the earth.
Yeah.
What it means to dance ahead, right? What it means to
ride a horse.
To ride a horse. To come down, as we put it, right?
Mm.
Nice.
Okay, but it brings to mind the idea of presence and humanity, and in the kind of Gurdjieffian model of the coach arriving, that is, there's the horse, there's the driver, and there's the carriage, and that these three things must work in cooperation with each other when we're talking about body, mind, and emotion. That these three things have to be put in balance in order to achieve forward motion. And the lovely thing about that metaphor is that when these three centers of the body are working in motion, that if the driver is driving the horse faster than it can go, the carriage and the horse are in danger. If the horse is going too fast, then the carriage and the driver are in danger. And if the coach has its own momentum, like, the horse is going to get... It's not good when anyone is driving when the other's too fast. So there must be cooperation between these three centers, and that when three are all aligned, then something can then enter the coach. So the idea of creating the body of light or spiritual consciousness is not a given. Just because you have a human body does not mean that you are immediately one of the privileged consciousnesses.
Right.
That it is a gift that must be embraced, which plays upon many themes. It plays on the turtle, the Buddhist turtle, you know that story? Of that to achieve, or there's a couple different versions I've heard, to be human and to hear or understand the Dharma is like throwing a ring on the ocean and the turtle pops its head up just through it. Some have even said to be human at all is that important, is that impactful, and that wasting your humanity on animalistic instincts is going to, you're not going to come back. You're not doing anything of interest forward. And of course this is, I just think the preciousness of consciousness comes back there, of Ori, of understanding that Ori is head, Orisha is select head, that certain heads in the past have proven that they are of more import than even their own single life, and is their memory the thing? Are we invoking those quote-unquote deities, those exemplars, those deified ancestors that were evidence of something beyond themselves, that then we understand what we're allied to? Syllables. Okay. How... You said you were curious to go back to waking up first thing in the morning. I'm sorry.
No, sorries. That beautiful thing about the importance of the Ori as what we honor at the start of the day after we've... So there's the hypnagogic of the medicine that we put on, of the rogations and stuff that we do, the head medicine that you would then go to sleep and attempt to integrate using sleep, and then you would integrate to life, waking up first thing, water to the head, Orisani, etc. That put me in mind of our figure and the links that are made with Fortuna Major and the rising sun. Fortuna Major is distinguished from Fortuna Minor as being not the easy come, easy go of fate as fortune and the flow of casinos and the movement of you moving away from a situation or into another situation, but the entering nature of Fortuna Major with its 2 points down It's the spearing of the tuning fork into the earth. It's the no, I'm not moving. I'm bringing the things to me, and a notion of the security. I mean, in classic thumbnail divination, not onychiomancy. I mean, like to thumbnail and to boil down. Fortuna Major is yes, success, triumph, which is interesting in terms of the assumption being the triumph over death, perhaps one of the major triumphs of mortality, of mortal consciousness. It's the hard-won success, crucially. It's that which sticks around. It's the success that you worked really hard for, and that you built the means to keep. It is the slow build, and there's something there about the start of the day. There's something there about greeting the rising sun. There's something there about all right, what's the work ahead of me today?
You know, it makes me think. I have no idea what this metal tool is that has now become my wand and comfort, but Owani. Owani is one of the primary Eshu Odus. It has relationship to poking holes in fate, like the dam that is weakening. Like we want things to flow, so we must destroy the dam. But there's an instability here. There's the metaphor or the refrain of you carrying water in a basket. It's not an appropriate tool for doing so, but it carries it for a little bit, but it's not going to last.
Work smart, not hard.
It is there's the dam that's involved there. What's interesting about Owani and its relationship to the truth. There's something that connects it to what we've talked about. And again, my caveat on anything Odu, like I'm trying very hard to go off published sources, but I'm thinking of new things that are interesting based on what we've talked about today, which talking about mythopoetry and its relationship to the truth, that Owani specifically speaks to the relationship of truth as a consensus. That there is nothing actually true that we can believe. We do not know. We arrive at a consensus either with past experience and rectify that experience with our knowledge, our belief, or we go off of popular conceptions. So like it's interesting to the sun's rising. Well, we know the sun doesn't actually rise, but like there's something to it of like we see the thing rise and everyone's like, its sun is risen, right. And like, yeah, it's risen. I believe. Yeah, I don't believe you. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's interesting to think of it in the modern terms of how much we dismiss magic, of like constantly surprised when people are referring to as like, oh my god, I can't believe that happened. It's like, that is not what you should say when a spell is successful, when a working is successful. Yes, it worked. Good for you. Do it again. Find out what worked. Repeat it.
Right.
And apply scientific method to magic is much better than applying magical method to science. Pseudoscience, bad.
Right. Right.
And a miracle occurs. Possession happens and everything is solved.
Right.
But I think there's something interesting there of Owani's relationship to even ungratefulness of like not giving credit where credit is due sometimes comes up there, or just a distrust of authority that happens there, a distrust of dogma, the breakdown in that way.
That's interesting. In a lot of the delineations around when the greater fortune is not always the best thing that comes up, the figure called greater fortune is not necessarily your best chance. It also has plenty of configurations that are bad. There seems to be an emphasis on this like radical self-reliance, that on the one hand, yes, Fortuna Major is the force that helps you like build your own castle. On the other hand, it's the one that refuses help for anyone else. And in any works of teamwork or of acknowledging someone else's authority, maybe.
It's interesting because it's the concept that like the dam will hold when it's obviously leaking. The basket will carry water for me. Like you're not facing the facts about something. You are not progressing forward, not because you're not trying, but because you are blinding yourself to something, which Eshu naturally is a force that confronts that. Eshu is movement. The force of movement, the deification of movement, which works for good or bad, and we can direct it. I mean, things move either direction, and if we go outside of a linear model, then like concentrically from the moment of any interaction, And, if applying magical model to science, quantum physics supports my argument. But it's not saying that quantum physics is bullshit, but most people's interpretation of quantum physics is bullshit. Judgment. I'm a very judgy person right now. No, I just... The trying to get away from stagnation, to allow Eshu to do his job and move us forward is an interesting side of that. Another kind of Gurdjieffian reference there, and specifically, I mean, even to break it outside of pure Gurdjieff, I mean, like, I'll betray my alliances here of, like, I've been with Jetchi for as long as I've been crowned. It's been 13 years now. Had a lot of talks with Matt, the director, Matt Mittler, about this, and even the way of planning things, that planning conscious shocks to your system will allow you to perform better when unplanned shocks happen. So why do we meditate? Not so that we know how to meditate when we are in a room and have perfect spinal alignment and there's music playing. We meditate so that when the tiger is fucking chasing us and trying to kill us, that we can be clear-headed and make the best decision to have the best outcome.
Yeah.
That's not the only reason we medicate. Medicate? Wow. Meditate.
I mean, not unfair, the derangement of the senses, right?
Yeah.
What to do, how to train what I've been thinking about as vital wit, right? Not the wit of speech, but the wit of action and awareness. And
is that your term?
I think so. I don't know. Maybe I nabbed it off someone else.
What? Hold the thought, because what you just did was that question was something at the. Let's speak a little bit about the VGS, the Virginia Symposium. Daniel Schulke was doing an amazing lecture talking about aphorisms of working on the path, and specifically with herbs. But one of the things that he brought up, which I really, really was happy that it was spoken to, was that many times when we come across something that we believe we originated, but we found out somebody else did it before us, that oftentimes, this is in Western model, people are dejected by this. Oh, I didn't think of it first. But what it really means is how in tune with the path you actually are, that you did not have to have it spelled out for you, and your brain made the next step. Mm-hmm. And it shows that you are in alignment with the path. And that should be embraced, and how exciting that is, that's when you start needing a teacher less, because other things are teaching you. So it's not that you cast off your teacher, but it means that you can then be trusted to come up with magic, come up with spells, because you are able to predict. If you come up with a complex spell and find out it was actually written in the 1400s, you're like, maybe I sat up and I'm pretty damn sure that I sat there and formulated why it would work on my own. Yeah. So now you understand the technology of how things are done. You have stopped mimicry and are starting magia.
Incorporating?
You are being possessed by the tradition. Ooh, that's an interesting side of it. So, sorry to interrupt you. I'll try and remember what I was saying.
Vital wit, and the notion of not comfortable in the sense of like, I'm cozy, but being able and capable of knowing of knowing how to be in a situation where you don't know what to do.
Adaptability
to an extent, but that moment of like an agility of awareness. Of being able to, I don't know, I'm thinking about this a lot in terms of like footwork, I suppose, but being able to know that you're off balance and still be able to like not fall on your ass, or if you are, turn it into a delightful pratfall or a fancy
it's called acting
a role.
Yeah, it's good. Acting. I mean, like this idea of improv and what that is, that what's the successful rules of improv, right? Yes, and you cannot deny the reality that's happening. You can't say nope, that doesn't count. We're not. What? That doesn't work in life.
I mean, Johnston has some stuff about, he says, a no and or a no but. A block can work, but it works in spite of itself. It's the exceptions that prove the rule, and you can't start.
It's not a true no, though. It's not a true rejection. In the same way, to me, you can work off of holy creation, holy destruction, holy resolution, but you can't have holy destruction without the bridge to resolution. It's not holy until there is something past it. So the rejection cannot just be no.
Right.
It's no and yes. And like there's got to be something that it bridges to a movement forward. So it's not
the difference between blocking the scene and blocking a character.
Yes.
And what
resistance saying. As opposed to nihilism.
Right.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Yes. I mean, I'm always interested in this kind of somatic expressions, somatic feedback of just understanding the body as the constant tool that we have, and our conversations a lot of the West's obsession with separating mind from body and spirit from matter, that they are concepts, but that doesn't mean that they're separate. And I think about this from in lifelong researches, right, of non-oppositional dualism that is so inherent in Mexica Nahuatl cosmology, of you can have two opposites that are by their nature intertwined. They don't have to be one or the other. It can be a little bit of both. It can be particle and wave. It does happen. And is perhaps teaches us more than assuming the truth and making all things fit our truth, which is, the thinker thinks and the prover proves, as far as Robert Anton Wilson. I light my invisible lighter to you. I actually feel like I have to light up a real lighter. Okay, there we go. Okay,
Throw it up.
There we go. Okay,
Hey.
Raw. Fantastic man. Met him in my teens and had lovely conversations with him.
Oh.
But the idea that we're always going to prove things to what our conceptions of the universe are, and that's really a dangerous sign. It's one of the signs of spirit contact, is that the spirit will challenge what you think something is. If the spirit constantly is reaffirming what you think the universe is, it is selling something.
Right.
In a bad way, or it's a delusion.
Right. I was having this conversation with my new housemate, who is also a magician and artist, and that I kind of realized that one of my rules of thumb is, if someone says that they're speaking to a spirit and the spirit tells them exactly what they thought was going to happen, A, why did you bother? And B, nothing unexpected, nothing out of the ordinary, no extra information, no new context. Again, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's and that gets expressed sometimes in terms of the extra stuff that happens when you do something. When you do something. When a magical operation is engaged in, when a new door is opened, when an act that isn't just, I'm trying to get this thing done, I'm trying to get my boss to pay me the back pay he owes me, or something, that there's a wider, that you've gone somewhere and done something, and the ripples of that have gone out and then start coming back to you in different ways. Like the things around what happens when you're magicking.
The ripples, concentric ripples out.
Sure.
That is an important feature of my perception of possession when it happens, in a group especially, that part of the nature of possession, the spirit should be tested, or has been tested in the past, because if it's not proving actually useful, if it's about the experience, somatically, psychologically, or otherwise, of the mount, then it is not useful. And unfortunately, possession by itself, you have nothing to gauge off of that many of the times. But that a spirit in possession not only physically can do things, but spiritually can do things, like the idea of seating a spirit in some form, in some houses of Umbanda. The spirit must possess, it must be tested, and then the spirit just goes and picks up an object and consecrates it with whatever it wants to, and says, "Here I am," and then leaves the body, and the spirit is dwelling both in the ether and in the object.
Yeah.
And then that can be treated as a point beyond that. And the important thing here is that it's tested. That your idea of something does not mean that it is there. You cannot, and this speaks to the nature, even in debates about solitary versus self-initiation. I do not believe in self-initiation. You can't initiate yourself to something that you can't access something you do not have.
Right.
Solitary initiation can happen. I believe that you can access things by yourself, but it is still spirit, and these are semantic words, but the differentiation is there.
Without any other humans.
Without any other humans.
Alive humans.
And that it is always spirit that initiates, even if it is through another human.
Right.
That it is not the human. The person initiated you, or that you were initiated by, or we use these weird terms.
Sure.
But the parlance of it being that, like, no, you were initiated to a deity, a spirit, or something that was brought in, and access was given by someone. But this idea still, I think, is really important to consider. There was a train of thought there too, but Casey Jones did a little bit. Okay. Fortuna Major associations for you.
As I say, Rising Sun, security.
New ones, Al.
New ones, new associations.
Fresh.
Attempting to do everything yourself.
Poking holes in your dogma.
maybe shoring up your own dogma a little bit. That this can be the least worst timeline. That's what Greater Fortune can mean. Can mean this is the best it gets. Like,
you
should see the other
oracle
guy.
when that
Oh
happens.
yeah. That's terrible. Ghastly business. It does resonate with a very solar quality. It's the expression of Sorath. I like the tuning fork of it. I like the notion that the hard work ahead of you is maybe yourself being tested as possessing oneself.
Okay. What does it mean as a judge? I'm just going to get specific here.
Oh, sure, yeah. Again, it can very much depend. So, least worst going forward. Amicio moving to... Sorry, Karka moving to Amicio, producing Fortuna Major, is a configuration of amputation. That something has to be closed off and lost, and that this is how you move forward to not get gangrene, or the equivalent of
compartment syndrome, that we've got to release it somehow.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, right? So like the dam is leaking. What do? We either have to strengthen the dam, or it must be torn down.
Oh, that would be the other way around, right? That would be Amicio as first and Karka as second. That's generally a sign of the leak has been sealed, but the cat is out of the bag, right? That's a configuration that says yes, you were losing money, and you worked out how to replace the locks on your shitty.
But you haven't gotten the money back.
But the money's gone.
Yeah.
And that's why it's also a configuration that's specifically good for the travel of news and information. Because the word escapes out before the hand can be clapped over the mouth.
Okay, that's interesting. All right.
There's generally a quality of returning back to the person having to rely on themselves, or is overly reliant on themselves.
Well, you make me think. I don't know why that was such a nice visual of the rising sun coming into you, and the kind of Danae being Zeus appearing to her in a shower of gold and impregnating her, and the idea of possession. Is it something foreign to us? Is it something native to us? What's our accessibility with it? Like, what is the control mechanisms that keep it in place and help us? But when you witness something beautiful, we talk, ideally, there's a permeability where it can affect us. And can we become overwhelmed with what we see? Like, this type of, if an event has so much of a soul of its own in kind of a Mesoamerican cosmology, that it can push part of your soul aside, and creates a soul loss. It's a trauma, a PTSD that happens because it is the blinding sun coming over the horizon. It blinds you. It takes away your own light briefly, and you've got to readjust, which is an interesting thing. Just the idea of who possesses whom in that. Is the sunlight something that our witnessing of it, do we own that moment? Or is the sun filling us? Is it like what is that the in breath as opposed to the out breath? Like, can we receive good thing in spirit contact? How are you hearing? Well, they're not talking to me. Is it because you're projecting constantly? Or what is it?
Is the cup full?
Yes.
You're presenting an empty cup, or a cup with space for them to put something in it.
Yeah, at least a sour shot or something. Okay.
I mean, Fortuna Major judges can be pretty varied.
Well, okay.
Fiery endings are generally emphasized. So court's ending, not as in it's all going to end in flames, but configurations that have a second witness that's a fire sign are generally more favorable.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're speaking to the world card to me, right? Of like an inheritance of, because if we talk about even to have the sun coming in and we inherit the sunlight. There's a way for it to impregnate us, a la Danae in the shower of gold, or a way for it to burn us, a la Semele and seeing Zeus in his full glory. And these two parallels are interesting because when we deal with the World card as the senior card that inherits the Fool's journey, it is the Fool who is moving in this kind of leg askance, haphazard way that then becomes the World card and the soul of the world. By the end of it, inheriting everything in perfect balance with the boundary of time and the Ouroboros and the four Gospels.
And the four Gospels, the four elements, the four principles, the four directions. Yes, there's something about this fourness is particularly important, I think.
And the World card speaks to me of a geomantic thing there, of the reference to the four mothers, or the ones that first started it, and the judge that bears witness to what the four mothers first spoke about. Because 128 possible configurations with the four mothers starting, that in time you will start to, you won't need to do the chart. I have known geomancers, usually Romulan casters, who they know if they know the first four, they can say, no, 7th house is this, 4th house is this, the 16th position, the reconciler is this, just because they know. And I think that's part of training too, that if you're going to answer the 99 questions, that you've probably had a huge amount of these things. But the idea that that the four mothers are the truth that shows you the judge. The judge is an inherent balanced state of the four mothers telling their story, which, I don't know, there's something beautiful in that with the World card. And certainly with the Fool, who is not floating in the timelessness of space, of the assumption of Mary. The World card is a perfect, it was Al's pick, which, it's funny because these are somewhat random. They're not drawn out of a hat, but there is the let's talk about this one. It might be connected, and we always find connections between.
Yeah. That's part of the game, for sure.
Yeah, because the spice must flow.
Do you think there's a direct reference to the assumption of Mary in the lady and the snake originally, which becomes the lady in the scarf with her two double-ended wands? Do you think there's a? I don't think it's. I'm not saying. Did Marseille Tarot? Was it sneaking in some Marian mysteries here? But by the time we get to say the Rider-Waite Smith to do our Times New Roman version, it
always serif fonts.
It seems
sans serif can go to hell.
Seraphim fonts. It seems that there's the angels with the hats or without the hats. There seems
six wings, Al. 6 wings,
and so many eyes.
Yes.
In heaven I have 4 faces.
In hell you have none.
And yet still I must scream and see your ugly mug.
Yeah. Scream out your ass, Al. Scream out your ass. I don't know where we're going with this, but it feels like we're referencing some movie that has not been done.
All right. Well, so as all right, there's a point. All right, Empress of Heaven, or Queen of Heaven, and also Empress of Hell. Right. And in is there a sense that this assumption marks the? Is it the promise fulfilled? Is it the actual? Is it her initiation? Is it a sense of like this is the beginning of your claiming your crown in heaven?
Well, is the card upright or reversed? If we don't read it in that way,
she's floating down.
Yeah,
Glorious.
She's the reflection of the water, not the act. She's the reflection of the moon on the water, not the moon itself.
Right.
Can we tell the difference? There's something to all of that. For me, the journey of the tarot. There is something into it if I apply that kind of Kimanda lens of this, and even to quote the Welsh triads, the Druidism in the long annals of Druidic history, but the Welsh triads that propose these Druidic axioms, which are obviously later than 16th century, I believe, but I think that wonderful pseudo-historiographical book by Capt, C-A-P-T, blue cover, remember from the Pasadena Library. I did not steal it. It was still there a few years when I went back. But it has the Welsh triads in there. One of the outstanding aphorisms in it is rewards and punishments are not the consequences of our actions, but the properties of them. And I enjoy that understanding with my embracing of Kimbanda, of the only thing we are slave to is the outcomes of our actions. That the Fool, in their first step, there is an outcome for every step, and there is a heaven or hell in that step, and that the Fool will go through reversals and uprightness through the journey no matter what, and will inherit the world at some point. But what is the world that they are inheriting is created in that first step, And there's something interesting to me that of like the fool is one leg up in the air, right, and the world is still one leg up in the air. And there's something about dance. I think one of my favorite tarot books is Meditations on the Tarot, which is it's such an amazing a journey into Christian Hermeticism, but going through just the major arcana, and its section on the world card starts with quotes about dance. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, then I was at work beside him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in this inhabited world and delighting in the sons of men. Proverbs. The Isadora Duncan quote, one truly lives only when one dances. And it reminds me of and I don't know the actual accuracy of this, but I think it's a Hafiz quote, but there was also that book by that guy who translated Hafiz but really just made up his own kind of interpretations of it and said that it was translated. And so a lot of people quote Hafiz and Rumi, and they are not actually those poems at all. They're just translators being poetic. But the idea that my God is a God who knows 4 words, come dance with me, that's the whole poem, and I love that poem. I want to say it's Hafiz, maybe it's Rumi, maybe it's this translator's stuff. Flag it out to me. But the idea that the invitation into co-creating the universe is a dance, and this relationship with give and take, the flow forward and backwards, is the picking up of the foot and making the step forward, parallel to my constant metaphor of breath. But one night foot, it's that Masonic thing of neither naked nor clothed, shod nor barefoot. This kind of constant opposites. It's the Baphometic understanding, right, of being a unification of opposites, somewhere in between, the liminality between those things, being both at the same time, non-oppositional duality. These are my masturbation words.
Well, even seeing, like, we're talking about the journey, the alpha and the omega of the fool and the world. We're seeing breath in the bones again, right? We have the primal air and the Saturn of Saturn playing double duty for the earth as well.
And also as far as the gospel writers go in the corners of the world, that they're often depicted as winged. So you have the winged bull. The eagle is already winged, but it was said to be Scorpio. It's metaphorically it's said to be Scorpio, so it's the eagle that is rectified from the scorpion's venom. And then the man who has wings, and the lion who has wings, which I love that in Venice the winged lion is because it's Mark's city, but it's just described as a griffin all the time. It's like, a griffin is not a winged lion, right? But okay, right, I'm with you.
So you get that goetically as well when you talk about the wings of a griffin. But we define a griffin as having eagle wings. Yeah. So what's going on here? Yeah.
But eagle, where is the understood verb in this? Like, is it wings like an eagle, or was it Frankensteinally created? Like, if I use an eagle feather, is that the same as a griffin feather? Right. No, it's not. It's from an eagle, not a griffin. Yeah. Does that mean their griffin wings or griffin feathers are as illegal as eagle feathers in the States?
I mean, it's probably way more endangered, right?
10,000 years. Are they on the Migratory Birds Act? Is there a Migratory Cryptid Act?
This bestiary exists for entertainment purposes only.
Caveat bestiary. Okay, so world, touching on some nice things there. The last 2, I believe, technically on the list, because at this point we might as well drive it home. We are doing pretty good on time considering how many tangents we've gone off on. So
these are our materia, right?
Myrtle. Who I believe is a sister of Rowan, right? I'm not crazy in remembering that. Isn't the one who actually has the toad put in her mouth, she's Myrtle?
Yeah, I think so.
Nice Venusian references as opposed to the solar references of Rowan. But
and Mercurial.
You did it beautifully.
You did it beautifully.
Rowan as Mercurial.
It can be.
Yeah, and Marshall. It's everywhere. Rowan is it's a fiery wood.
And certainly the thing that is searched for. I mean, just in terms of the Wicker Man, right? Is searched for and is duplicitous and leads, but is also led.
But it's solar. It's the flaming. It's the set the man on fire. Burn the Christians out.
Yeah. Okay.
I just remind one of the we're weird, and I know when we talked about this creation of this podcast and like framing things on the liturgical Christian calendar, some people are like, why do they do that when they talk about magic and paganism all the time? Because you're not my real dad and you never will be. But also the
lies make baby Jesus cry.
Yeah. Catholic means universal. Just embrace it. It's a lot easier. Pretending like you're pooping. It'll be much easier.
Breathe out.
Yeah. But also I'm going to quote some Lafayette from True Blood, which is wonderful that, Jesus and I are in an open relationship. We've agreed to see other people, and it works out good for us. Like, he still comes around occasionally. It is some good times.
There's a dude around you local that looks like exactly like that guy. Slowly making friends.
All right, so Myrtle and Moonstone. Mm-hmm. I think let's talk about both at the same time.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it'll bring in other topics for sure.
Mm-hmm. One of the main things that I love about Myrtle as the fact that it's not just a Venusian plant, it's one of the Venusian plants.
Absolutely.
Right? And one of the things that I really like about it is that it evokes not just like love as an abstract that we hope for, but the procession. That it involves movement, that it involves going to somewhere, and it's special because it's special, and and it's special because you go there, and you go there because it's special, and there is a co-creation that's occurring, that you are doing it in community as well, that there's a sense of like leading something, that we're not just abstract, that so much love work isn't just about hoping, or even the other side of it of like working on yourself. Sure, yeah, those are really important things to bear in mind. But there is a sense of it's connecting up things in a vector. There is a sense of like making a future that we are all walking towards. The procession can take on qualities of like the arch that of swords, a bunch of like wedding imagery to it. That it is something that crowns as well, typically, right? It's being used in various forms of like laurel, which is often paired with.
Yes.
Interestingly, and so we have this model of like the sun that goes into the underworld with Bay, and we have the morning and evening star that shines.
Well, and the thing about Myrtle as a crown is that's what Paris crowned Aphrodite with when declaring her the loveliest of the gods. So the interesting thing about that is that, again, that's the fool's journey, right? So this sets in chain the emotions that become the Trojan War and the Odyssey, and horrible events in humankind, which is very hard because it's the whole thing of the gods fought on both sides of the war. Like they split amongst themselves, and like it's this thing of like this idea that the monotheistic god sides on the good side, the good people. It's this thing of like a constant complaint of political language that gets polarized in religious terms only proves. I promote her all the time, but Karen McCarthy's argument that like you cannot actually have separation of church and state. It does not exist. Religion exists to justify political action, whether on a small scale or a large scale.
Sure.
So your religious beliefs justify your morality, whether it's thinking globally or nationally or communally or familially or renegade self-person. But the idea that Myrtle invokes love in all of its totality, and like we've talked about this before, that love magic is like the darkest magic to many magical practitioners. To take someone's will away and make them fall for you is like the ultimate in I don't care what happens for the other person. In many of the classic love spells, that the gods be tortured until the person comes to you and you feel them, and that they are subservient to your wish.
That person be tortured until they do what you want them to do.
Yeah.
Right. So there's much more love for being loved than there is for a care for the literal target of your affections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the concept of what love is, I think Myrtle invokes that so constantly, of ideas of what love is change throughout our own lives, let alone historically, that love is not a universal human emotion, that it just doesn't make sense in all cultures. It is something that once it sneaks in, then the ideas of no one loves me or things like that. Like there's cultures that doesn't make any sense. That love sickness is, when we talk about psychological illnesses in studying curanderismo, they're talking about like susto solas as a psychologically bound illness, the culturally psychologically bound illness, or mal de ojo as a cultural illness that Westerners don't necessarily get. White people might not get that in the same way, and then they're embracing that as a pseudo-psychological term, like, well, maybe susto is PTSD. And they're like, okay, maybe, but like, okay. But following that model that love itself is a culturally bound conception of cures and illnesses that exists in the West. That sexual desire and attraction is very different from love, but it's conflated. Fertility is very different from love, but it's conflated.
Yeah.
That Venus herself, when we reduce her to goddess of love, it is very different from goddess of creativity, abundance, inspiration.
Craft.
Yes, that there is, especially when we go to Venus as opposed to Aphrodite, that I think that there's a shift there that happens, because in Roman mythology, Minerva does not have all of the associations that Athena did. Her importance as supporting the triad of Jupiter and Juno, and being a lightning goddess and executing state decisions and the rapidity of thought and wisdom, but she loses her craft as much. She doesn't. She strays away from being the weaving goddess, and some of those things is because they're appropriated by other deities, whether it's Diana or Venus, and even other male deities that come in and usurp some of those powers. But I think the notion of inspiration itself is so intrinsically tied to Venus by the time we get to planetary conceptions in the Neoplatonic models, that there is other sources of inspiration, but the muse itself is it's the Lian and Shi thing. It's the thing that will destroy you, inspires you. Like, you love this person and you'll do everything. You'll think of every way to get them to you. But it's that same fallacy that we have of like, well, once you get them, what happens? It doesn't mean love is not enough. Like, we talk about it, God is love, but what does that mean? Is God Venus? Well, is God Venus then? Wow.
May still be ruling this aeon by some standards of planetary aeonship.
Okay, so with Myrtle, what are your favorite uses of Myrtle? Other than to crown us and declare, that love reigns supreme and then start the Trojan War.
I like it, as I say, as something that implies movement from somewhere to somewhere else, from a less sacred place to a more sacred place. Its processional stuff means a lot to me, even to the extent of putting it in, sprinkling it in either left or right shoe, depending on the client's best foot forward, moving forward. Because often there's a sense with love work where someone, this isn't their first rodeo. Most of the time that you are at the point where you're consulting a diviner and a worker on your love life in a way that fits or accords with the ethics of the practitioner. It's generally not the first thing they've tried to do. It's generally a sense of frustration at consistently trying to put themselves out or meet someone new or keep someone, and so it prompts assessment of patterns and of getting the fingers in the stagnant water potentially. Actually, that sense of
because angel water is vivifying to the face in the senses it promotes. That's cool. I think with the lore of Myrtle too is like it does favor salt air. And the specific lore, I think it's English especially, but probably Western European in that sense, that it will only live if planted by women. Like, it can be found wild, or it can be cultivated by women. That its nature, the martial energy of men, is too much for it. It will taint it. Yeah. And that's quite interesting to me. It does have, on like a purely medical herbalism side, it has antiseptic, antimicrobial properties. And it's an expectorant, so it makes it heals the respiratory system, which, as far as inspiration, is interesting.
Inspiration, and it also makes me think of the Venus on a bad day, Emissio, that we carry grief in our lungs by TCM models, I think, and a couple of others. But the idea of like breathing clear about something. That's cool.
Emotional profile in notes, talking about Myrtle having an intelligence that is helping shift people who seem to have a gray veil over anything connected to the lungs, smoking, anger, greed, envy, anything that feels not like obstructing, but like it's a coating on the person, grimy, that Myrtle helps cleanse that. And it helps activate and then purge disharmony in the body, even for the dying, that it helps people resolve different imbalances as they're dying. It's a very there's specific offers that like to throw that around, but it doesn't seem outside of its scope mythologically and traditional uses in that way. I know that my teacher, who was really big on spoons, as the witch's wands, of like, you know, yes, a wand is lovely, but one end should be carved as a spoon because we stir things with it. But that like Myrtle was preferred even over apple for Venusian connection, or that apple and Myrtle were very close, but apple promotes sex more than love, and love is very complex and could incorporate many things.
Right.
But Myrtle truly stirred the energies of Venus in a way that was quite unlike any other plant.
Yeah. It seems, apple seems to pull back to earth, and Myrtle seems to pull up to the if we take the direction of like up as heavenly in some way, seems to connect us up that way as opposed to connecting us up to what's on the ground or even under the ground. We're going to do that kind of dichotomy.
No, that's interesting because I mean the apple is so connected with fertility. Both are rose family ultimately, aren't they? They're all, I believe, related.
Apple certainly is.
Way back, not like, not family wise or order wise, but above that.
Genus.
Genus is towards the bottom. Myrtle is the genus.
Then
there's the three species, communis and whatever Saharan myrtle is, and blah blah blah. And it's synonyms. That each of the deities have their crown of plants. That Aphrodite is myrtle, just as like you said, that Bay and Apollo and Olive and Athena. That there's this plant that signifies them at their crowned state.
Which we get in the world card, right? We get that like Vesica
going
on.
Yeah. The Vesica, and then is not the world like literally wearing a crown of plants on many versions of itself.
Well, this was something I was wondering about, like circlets and coronets and crowns of stars that as Queen of Heaven that might also be the stars of that might be leaves as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's interesting. Of course, always this. Sorry, I'm shuffling through tarot cards that happen to be in front of me. Le Monde. Well, there she is. Very Momajira-like, right? Of her staff and the leaf garland, but there's the bundles of laurel, assumedly, around actually holding it when it's not an Ouroboros. This person has never seen a lion. This card.
In the Rider-Waite-Smith, she's not wearing.
But it is still a bundle of leaves.
But yeah, absolutely.
Fascia held together. And its relationship to the body. Thinking of you, Alcestis. Wow. Okay. And this is going to be very difficult to find the card that I want. But no, that's all very interesting.
Very nice.
Yeah, so Judgment, but that's obviously the world there. Can't be any other card. So holding the sphere. So I don't think that's Judgment. But okay, so we have these different relationships of different plants. Myrtle herself getting the frog thrown in her mouth in the movie we keep referencing. I don't know. I mean, it's such a. It is one of the Sukkot plants, Jewish lore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the 4 plants, the Feast of the Tabernacle, where they erect the myrtle is one of the things that's important. And I believe, no, stupid. I have to go off memory now, which is even worse. Something about it's bringing together community in a convivial, congenial way.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Again, the processional nature of it, right? That we come together on a vector to do something, not just amassing and populusing.
Yeah, it's like palm, willow, myrtle, and citron are all involved with that. But I think, contrary to, because I still consider Jewish lore Mediterranean, just East Mediterranean, and even though the lore of Aphrodite is Cypriot, like of this moving out from there, that I believe it's directly related as a masculine plant in Jewish lore, like phallic force. But I don't know.
That's cool.
Like, it's just an interesting dichotomy of what goes with there. Yeah. So what of? I mean, we'll weave back to Myrtle if there's anything, that we feel like it. Because whose podcast is this? Moonstone. I mean, might as well not leave the one thing out.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I said this because I just literally got a shipment in of Moonstone because I adore Moonstone.
What you going to use them for?
Well, there's a few things. It depends on. I have some guias to make some beaded strands to make for Kimanda spirits. Moonstone is because of its similarities to opal, to mother of pearl, to these things that look like they have a rainbow film over it. It invokes Das Almas to me, and a coolness there. Personally, white moonstone I associate with Obatala. Moonstone in general, yes, but like the whiter it is, obviously, the closer it becomes to this. But especially like Obamoro, because of the connect. Like, the luminescent reminds me of dreams. So this kind of call, the film, the otherness that's there, the placenta, the shine that's there. I do like the lore that it is believed to be crystallized from the moon's rays itself.
Right.
Which I had that kind of weird scientific clash when I was reviewing that information. And they were like, did they really think that though? Like, can it be an imaginal?
Yeah. Can you tell nice stories about a thing? Nice. Can you tell stories about something without literally thinking that's where it came from?
Because it's the thing of like, do I, looking back through the same lens, is there something just that's not? Can it be an emblematic interpretation of something that speaks to a truth that is both acknowledged as mythopoetically true, but not necessarily thinking that you think that rocks form out of the air.
Right.
I don't know, because is this just my brain trying to justify wisdom of cultures that are not having access to the same scientific assumptions that I have? But
that's also a teaching story, right? Because as far as I know, one of the reasons that the moonstone is said to be from the moon, or lights the night up like the moon, is that it changes depending on it. The stone itself is changeable and does different things at different times, like the moon and its capricious motions across the sky, as its carrier between the mansions. That what it's doing changes, and so that account of it being like the moon is a historiola that tells us something about the stone. It isn't just how the leopard got its spots, right?
Well, yeah, this reminded me of something with Myrtle too. Of the okay, so I always kind of quote my own categories for where associations with plants come from. That there's the phytochemical, which is the effect the plant has chemically upon us, upon nature. There's the sympathetic, like how it grows, what it looks like as it grows. There's mythos, which is usually based in one of those other things. And then there's where it grows, like the specific conditions of a specific plant, which are 4 access points to the power of a plant. For me, this is my TM theory over years. But I was thinking about that with Myrtle, of here the plant is used mythically. We have a source as being Venusian and being literally crowning her with it, that transmits that knowledge of, like, it's always associated with love, just as a Venusian embodiment of that energy. And is there something phytochemically in it? Not necessarily, but there's a sweetness to it. So there is something there that's in the phytochemical that adds to this lore around it. And Moonstone, similarly, I have never thought about those theories of a stone doing that thing, but like, again, I compare it to other things that are luminescent of, or opalescent of opal and anything that is having that weird labradorite film.
Yeah, that
Aurora
luster.
Yeah,
and it is. It can feel accidental, right? I just got a load of moonstones in as well to make
did you?
spirit houses and talismans, and seeing the different stones, like having a bunch of them together, and seeing how some of them you can pick up, moonstone beads as well. You can pick up and see the luster instantly. Some of them don't really have it at all, except from an exact angle, and you have to be set there, and the light has to be coming from there, and that's how it like gives that little like that little slightly rainbow blue luster. That sheen does feel like you wouldn't catch it the same way twice. It does feel passing. It does feel a little like situationally unique.
I'm always curious. I was looking back to see where it naturally occurs in the world, other than New Age shops and Etsy. But Armenia, Australia, the Austrian Alps, one of the oldest known sites for mining moonstone, Mexico, Madagascar, Myanmar, Norway, Poland, India, Sri Lanka, and the United States.
Okay.
But I just always find it interesting, like because that's where I want to. Okay, what's the lore around those areas?
Yeah.
Kind of gun germs and steel of
terroir.
Yeah, exactly. The terroir that leads to the magic. I know that it was associated with lunar deities, which was I got that, but then of course the Dianic influence and what that is, and the vision. I also like it for its colic reference of like being born behind the caul, but also the vision of the cataract over the eye and the kind of Teresian effect of how seeing between the veils.
The blinded eye.
Yeah.
And seeing between veil as well.
Yeah.
Crucially.
As
you are veiled, so you are already like have an eye in there.
Exactly. And the kind of creator deity metaphor of like the aged creator deity that's slow moving is actually the one that moves the world and has this fast effect that's very macrocosmic. And I don't know, just and apparently that's called shilling, which is the play of color.
Oh.
So there's sheen and there's schiller. Sorry, not shilling. Shilling is money. Schiller is sheen, is the play of color. But yeah. I don't know. It's as far as the other side of it, Dianically, I do associate it in my own weird childhood, teenage ways of when I first was obsessed with Artemis of Ephesus, that I had the idea of absolutely those are breasts. I don't believe they're dates or whatever those are.
Goals,
one many-breasted thing that nurtures everybody is wonderfully important. But the breast milk of her is crystallized as like moonstone. There's this some part of my 13-year-old pagan self who was desperately trying to figure out how to combine Diana, Hecate, and the Virgin Mary in those early days in a way, just because that's what made the most sense to me. Like, I can't get rid of the moon deity I have already. That's just stupid. Mary's got to be in there, and she went to Ephesus, and like, hello, she's really the same thing.
Red thread.
Oh, I
definitely
had that idea. I don't know. I was like 8 or 9, where my grandmother was, my dad's mom was a Chaucer and a Shakespeare nerd, and I love the anachronisms in like Julius Caesar mentioning by Mary, and this type of thing of constant back and forth. But the idea that some have posited that the Greek gods, in hiding from the Titans, they're said to have disguised themselves as animals, and that's where the Egyptian gods came from. And that following that mythology and following that kind of, let's combine everything so it all makes sense factually and on a linear timeline, that at some point the gods decided that they were not having effect on the populace anymore and combined their forces to form the one god. And this kind of whole
They consolidated all of their existing lines into one.
Exactly. They became a mega bank.
Yeah.
What is it? There's only like 11 banks now in the U.S. Like, the rest are credit unions, because there used to be over 300 in the early 90s, and they've all combined.
Yeah.
Scary. They better be FDIC insured. But yeah, there's this. What is syncretism? Like the dominant culture moving in there, and the moon is such an interesting thing because it receives everything. Is that whether it's the prison of Cain, or the moon that as it grows in light it receives the souls of the dead, and as it diminishes in light that it's pushing the souls of dead.
Psychosis,
yeah, that's
raining back the dead back down in the bigger water cycle of our ancestors. Yeah.
And I think about the importance of breast milk as a nurturing force, the lactating Madonnas that are like taboo in like American culture, but like are so important. That certain plants and certain stones grow when the breast milk of the Virgin hits the ground.
And Locuto quotes Mandeville and Pseudo Mandeville even on some of the uses of Moonstone include this nourishment stuff. Physically, so a healing stone, literally.
You mean I tapped into the current? Al?
You did! You tapped into the current, apparently!
Yeah, milk baths for everyone!
Milk baths for everyone. Yeah, protects from storms, heals lunatics, and helps win honours. Some of its other uses.
Which are all things where like lightning flashing across the sky and like the lunatic mind is inconstant, so it's like a homeopathic like thing there.
And literally of the moon.
Yeah, lunacy. Literally.
Mm-hmm.
Not just
not just
because I'm
English figuratively, literally. Yeah. Or emphatically. So. Yeah.
And it makes me think too of the depictions of. The obsession of Western modern lens to make all art representational, and the coming up against like depictions of Shango in Nigerian art where he's depicted as a woman, or that a male figure might be depicted with breasts but still male genitalia, and the idea that is it a woman who's depicted with a phallus or a male who's depicted with breasts? A king nourishes their people. A king is constantly holding people to his breast in order to be a good king, and that the idea of being depicting as a woman. But also the fact that women were considered to hold the fire deity's head energy in their head better, so the Oshe comes out of the splitting head of the woman. Like there's all these things there of like we don't necessarily know when we're looking at it through a Western lens of interpretation. Just like we've talked about this with the Oloquin heads before, that like these heads of we worship this headless deity that lives in the bottom of the ocean
because we have the head here.
We have the head here, as opposed to the fact that the head is the seat of consciousness, and the Celts didn't worship a headless deity just because they had heads as well. It's a very strange thing. It's like saying that, well, I guess as Catholic, yes, we do worship this weird tree deity that's like nailed to it, and like that's its own thing, but
rude.
The holy rude, not he's calling me rude. There's so many other things you could call me. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty thorough examination for our first one.
Yeah.
We've been pregnant with this episode energetically for 9 months, so it's great to get it out there. I think one of the fascinating or the rewards of doing this is like the insights gained from actually just talking through shit.
For sure, yeah.
And the fame. But that's a very world card thing, right? Of like, there's all these things that are written, these sources that we're going through, and personal experience, whatever it is, whatever our gospel leaning is, that are brought to synthesis through a wreath of laurel or myrtle or whatever it is that we're doing. And maybe the world card is holding 2 little batons to hit us both over the head with.
From either end.
Yeah, coming and going. The tree of heaven and the tree of hell, the queen of heaven and the empress of hell. Something going on there. But yeah, so it's a little out of order. I hope still that there's still some missing episodes we can get done. Won't talk about them too much because maybe eventually they'll get done. But I think our last episode before this was Saint Raphael last year, so it's good to get jabbing again.
Yeah.
Wasn't as easy to get back on that bike though, dude.
No.
Wow. And we talk all the time, so it's not us. That means, dear friends,
it's you. No, it's a delight, and and dialogue in physical space, and the closest you can get to it, poured through a radio, is
pronounced radio.
Fantastic.
Raido. We could put a rune in every time and just really mix it up. Okay. So this has been our something episode of Radio Free Golgotha. And thank you so much for listening. We are keep releasing the unknown episodes and keep making new ones. So thanks for listening in. I don't know. I still think there's something in it, in a wish for all of this, with the Assumption of Mary. That is it dormition or assumption? Like, how do we enter into even our worst moments or our unconscious? Can we approach things with intention and consciousness? Can we bring the efforts of our good times enough with us to weather us through the bad times? Can we keep our sense of character, our sense of self? Can we honor the consciousness that is in our head? Can we appreciate
Arise as our better selves?
Appreciate the sunrise for what it is, and not complain that morning is not the magician's friend. I don't know. There's something there. Can we assume ourselves rather than enter our own dormition?
Right.
Like, what assists our awakening? People, events, places, things either propel us forward or, at best, stagnate us. At worst, move us backwards.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that those things will always do that, but there's definitely what is useful in the moment, and I prefer that kind of more shamanic. What is useful right now might not be useful tomorrow, and therefore applying dogma is not helpful, but forming our own observant rules.
Right, which is where those strictures of the 4 Gospels in the corner that we draw from allow a response to floating in a world of change and stability.
And she did perhaps cast a magic circle of laurel leaves to protect her from the Gospels. Just putting it out there. She's double wanding because she's got a club for each of the Gospels there.
Right.
I just realized she's totally threatening them.
Carrot and stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that very much.
Draw circles to protect yourself from your own dogma. Poke holes in the dam to test its strength. Crown yourself in myrtle and remember that love is probably a better guide than many other things.
And the love we find along the way, and that we walk in parallel to for periods.
And may all your spilt breast milk turn into moonstones.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right, thank you, listeners. We will be back soon, we hope. And with that, slut.
Slut.
Might be sloot.
We should get a pronunciation. Thanks, everyone.
All right.